Inhale and let go of the day. Close your eyes as we drift back in time to where one of the greatest empires in history quietly began. It is the late 13th century. The Anatolian sky stretches wide over rolling hills and sleepy plains. The wind moves like a soft whisper, rustling through the grasslands of Soğut, a quiet frontier town at the edge of the crumbling Seljuk Sultanate. The year is around 1299. In this peaceful corner of the world, a man named Osman gazes out across the horizon. The world is changing. The once mighty Seljuk Empire is splintering, weakened by internal strife and the invading Mongols. But in that vacuum, Osman sees something else, a chance, a dream, a vision of unity, forged not by birthright, but by loyalty, belief, and purpose. Osman is not a sultan, not yet. He is the son of Ertuğrul, leader of the Kaya tribe, a branch of the Oghuz Turks who had migrated westward, seeking refuge, prosperity, and survival. They are warriors, but also farmers, craftsmen, and believers in the dream of a just society. Guided by faith, Osman's dream is more than just conquest. He wants to build a state where the just rule the land, where the poor are protected, where different faiths coexist under one strong and fair rule, and where Islam's values of justice and mercy guide every decision. But dreams require sacrifice. Osman begins gathering support, tribesmen, ghazis, holy warriors, and scholars who share his vision. With courage and patience, he begins to carve out a territory at the very edge of Byzantine lands, establishing a small but determined principality. The Byzantines see him as a nuisance, a tribal leader with little power. But slowly, Osman begins to win battles. Small towns fall under his control. Fortresses once ruled by distant emperors begin flying his banner. His army is small, but it is devoted. His leadership is wise and just. Word spreads. A new power is rising in Anatolia, one not rooted in luxury or nobility, but in discipline, belief, and grit. As the nights pass, the moon above seems to grow, fuller, as if echoing the symbol that will come to define his legacy. A crescent, a rising crescent of power, belief, and destiny. By 1326, Osman's dream begins to bloom. Though he would pass away that year, his legacy would not fade. His son, Orhan, would capture Bursa, a jewel of a city that would become the empire's first capital. The world does not yet know it, but a seed has been planted, a seed that would grow into one of the longest-lasting empires in history, an empire that would stretch across continents, spanning over 600 years, the Ottoman Empire. So sleep now gently, as Osman's footsteps fade into the mists of history. His dream is just beginning, and in the nights to come, we will follow that dream, through golden ages, through battles, through beauty and sorrow, until the final breath of the empire's last sultan. But for now, let the stars of Anatolia watch over you, let the wind carry you into rest, and let the story begin. Settle in, let your shoulders soften, and drift deeper into the story, as the legacy of Osman passes into the hands of his son. The year is 1326. The early morning light spills softly over the rooftops of Soğut, but far beyond its quiet boundaries, the world is beginning to notice a name once whispered on the frontiers: Osman. And now, a new name rises beside it: Orhan Gazi, the eighth son who inherits not just land or title, but a vision. Orhan is not a shadow of his father. He is a leader in his own right, calm, deliberate, and deeply strategic. Where Osman laid the foundations, Orhan builds. His eyes are set on the rich and vital city of Bursa, nestled beneath the shadow of Mount Uludağ, with its stone walls, sacred domes, and winding streets alive with trade and culture. Bursa is a Byzantine stronghold, guarded and fortified, but also vulnerable. Weakened by neglect from Constantinople and growing unrest, the city's defenses are no match for the slow, determined push of Orhan's forces. He surrounds the city not with reckless fire, but with patience. A long siege begins. Months pass. Supplies thin. Tension rises within the walls. Then one day, quietly and without glory, the city surrenders. There are no brutal massacres, no cruel declarations. Orhan walks into Bursa not as a conqueror with vengeance in his eyes, but as a ruler seeking a new beginning. The city, he decides, will be his new capital. Not Sout, not a village, but a true city, a shining heart for the empire to be. And in Bursa, Orhan begins to plant the roots of a state. Not a loose tribal alliance, but a real, structured government. He builds mosques that echo with prayers, markets that hum with trade, schools where scholars teach, and hospitals where the poor are treated with dignity. His people, Turkish, Greek, Armenian, Jewish, live under one law, under one ruler. Diversity is not crushed but protected. A gentle rhythm begins to form in this new Ottoman state. The prayer at dawn, the sound of coins in the bazaar, the call to justice in the courts, the quiet clicking of scholars' pens, the armor of soldiers hung gently at night beside their beds. Under Orhan's rule, the empire becomes more than a frontier dream. It becomes real. And with real strength comes real ambition. The Byzantines watch nervously. In Constantinople, they realize the danger has grown. What once seemed a tribal nuisance is now a disciplined, growing force, a state with vision, law, and unity. And Orhan is not alone. He is supported by brilliant advisors, a disciplined army, and perhaps most significantly, a new military class unlike any before. They will be called the Janissaries. But that story too will come. Tonight, let us linger in Bursa. Imagine the scent of warm bread from the markets, the glow of lanterns along cobbled streets, the hushed reverence of the grand mosque in evening prayer, and above all, the calm but steady heartbeat of an empire being born. The crescent has risen higher. The dream grows clearer, and as you fall deeper into rest, know that this is still only the beginning. Breathe in, slowly, and exhale. Let the story carry you now, deeper into the heart of the empire, where discipline, power, and silence formed a force unlike any the world had seen. It is the mid-14th century. The Ottoman state is growing stronger by the year, but Orhan knows that true power cannot rest on tribal loyalties alone. Something more structured is needed, something that lasts beyond charisma or family ties, something that would become the very backbone of the empire's future. So begins the creation of the Janissaries, an elite force unlike any other. It starts quietly. The Ottomans look not to the usual recruitment of soldiers, but to a new system, the devshirme. From Christian villages across the Balkans, in places like Albania, Bosnia, and Greece, young boys are taken, not as slaves, not as prisoners, but as raw stone to be carved into perfection. These boys are brought to the palace, confused, afraid, and alone. They are given new names, new clothes, new languages, and over time, new loyalties. They are not forced to fight. They are trained, slowly, patiently, with intention. They study the Quran. They learn to read and write. They are taught discipline, endurance, silence. Their muscles are strengthened, their minds sharpened, their hearts steeled. These boys, at once scattered across distant villages, become brothers. A family born not of blood, but of fire and will. They swear loyalty not to a tribe, nor even a sultan, but to the empire itself. And when they march, the earth feels it. Their uniforms are clean, their movements precise. They carry the latest weapons of the time, bows, swords, and later gunpowder muskets. They do not retreat. They do not speak out of turn. They are known across Europe with a single word that brings both awe and terror: Janissary. But within the empire they are something more, a symbol of unity, a bridge between worlds, Christian-born, Muslim-raised, poor in birth, rich in purpose. They are the empire's soul in steel form, and their power does not stop at war. Many of these young men, chosen for their intellect, rise beyond the battlefield. Some become scholars, others governors. Some even serve as advisors to the Sultan himself. The palace gates are not closed to them. For in the Ottoman Empire, loyalty and talent can rise higher than birth. As the Janissaries grow, so too does the empire's ambition. The Balkans begin to tremble. Cities that once scoffed at the Turks now whisper their names in fear. The Ottomans are no longer just one of many Bey-likes. They are becoming the Bey-like, the force that others must either join or flee from, and through it all the Janissaries stand in perfect silence, not demanding gold, not seeking glory, but holding the line, patient, precise, permanent. Tonight, as your eyes begin to close, picture them standing in formation, hundreds of soldiers under moonlight, their faces still, their armor catching the stars. No shouting, no movement, just a quiet presence that promises order in chaos and strength in loyalty. The empire now has its heart, but soon it will find its blade, and it will turn toward the greatest city of all. Sleep now softly. The story continues. As night deepens and your thoughts grow still, let the story gently guide you through a new chapter, one where the Ottoman banner spreads further, and the empire steps onto a greater stage of history. With Orhan's passing, the torch is passed once again, now to his son Murad I, a ruler both patient and powerful. The foundations laid by Osman and strengthened by Orhan are now placed in Murad's hands. But unlike his predecessors, Murad will not only build, he will expand. Under his reign, the Ottomans begin to look west, toward the Balkans, where kingdoms are fragmented and alliances are brittle. It is a land of rivers, hills, and ancient pride. But it is also a land in transition, one uncertain of its future and vulnerable to a force that moves with quiet strength. Murad is not reckless. He is measured. Every campaign is planned with care, every alliance considered. He surrounds himself with skilled commanders and wise advisors, and above all, he trusts the discipline of his Janissaries, now a force that inspires both fear and admiration across Europe. His greatest ambition? To secure a lasting Ottoman presence in Europe, to extend the empire beyond Anatolia, into the very heart of the Christian kingdoms. And so he moves slowly, carefully, seizing towns, building fortresses, and weaving Ottoman control into the seams of the Balkan map. He takes Edirne, a city rich in culture and strategy, and makes it the new capital of the empire, a symbolic shift. The Ottomans are no longer a frontier state. They are now a true European power, knocking on the gates of kings and emperors, but such expansion does not go unnoticed. The Balkan states, Serbs, Bosnians, Hungarians, and Albanians, begin to take Murad's rise seriously. Tensions simmer. Armies gather. Alliances form. And by the year 1389, it all converges on a single field, Kosovo Polje, the field of blackbirds. The night before the battle is eerily quiet. A sea of tents stretch across the plains. Fires flicker in the dark. Some soldiers pray, some sleep. Others stare at the stars, wondering if they will see another dawn. Murad walks alone that night, not as a sultan wearing gold, but as a man wearing the weight of an empire. He knows this battle is not just about land. It is about legacy, identity, destiny. When morning comes, the battle begins. It is fierce, chaotic, and brutal. Arrows rain from the sky, swords clash, horses fall. The air is thick with dust and cries. The Ottomans, led by Murad and his generals, fight with resolve. The Balkan coalition, fierce in defense of their homeland, resists with unmatched determination. And then, silence. When the dust settles, the Ottomans have won. But the victory is heavy, for in the midst of triumph, Murad is struck down, assassinated, according to many accounts, by a disguised Serbian knight who breached the inner circle during Gi. The battle's end. The Sultan who led his people from the edge of Anatolia into the heart of Europe falls at the height of his glory. His body is buried on the battlefield, and a shrine is built in his honor. His heart, they say, was left in Kosovo, as a sign that his spirit would always remain with the land he bled for. But Murad's dream does not die. His son Bayezid takes up the mantle without hesitation, and the crescent moon continues to rise undeterred by grief. As you lie here tonight, feel the weight of history slow your breath. Let the echoes of hooves fade into the distance. Let the torches of Edirne flicker softly in your mind. For tomorrow, we follow the path of Bayezid, the thunderbolt, and a new chapter of ambition, defiance, and destiny. But for now, sleep easy. The empire stands, and the story carries on. Close your eyes and breathe with the rhythm of history. Tonight we follow a new ruler, fast as lightning, fierce as thunder, whose ambition would shake even the ancient walls of Constantinople. It is the year 1389. On the field of Kosovo, a prince stands over the body of his fallen father. His name is Bayezid, son of Murad, and now Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. There is no time to mourn, not truly. The battlefield is still hot with smoke, and enemies still linger. But Bayezid does not hesitate. With a presence that commands silence, he speaks, not of sorrow but of vengeance, of power, of swift judgment. His men, inspired and stunned, move with him like shadow to flame. And from this moment forward, he earns a name that will echo across kingdoms, Yildirim Bayezid, the Thunderbolt. Not for nothing is he called that. His rule is marked by speed, by ferocity, by decisions that strike before others even see the storm coming. Where Murad built slowly, Bayezid moves like a tide. Towns fall, fortresses crumble, kings retreat. But his greatest desire, his obsession, is Constantinople, the jewel of the Byzantine world, the last remnant of an empire that once ruled half the known earth, a city of golden domes, high walls, and sacred relics. To capture Constantinople would not just be a victory, it would be a symbol, a declaration that the old world is gone and a new one is rising under the crescent banner. So Bayezid surrounds the city. He builds Anadolu Hisara, a fortress on Phi, the Asian side of the Bosphorus, a dagger aimed directly at the city's throat. He tightens trade, cuts off supplies, and begins the first true siege of Constantinople by the Ottomans. Inside the city, fear grows. The Byzantines, long weakened and reduced in power, look out from their mighty walls and see not nomadic raiders, but an organized force with artillery, fleets, and purpose. But the city holds, for now. Bayezid does not falter. While the siege lingers, he turns his attention to other threats. The Balkan states, still defiant, are defeated one by one. Bulgaria falls. Serbia becomes a vassal. His empire stretches from the Danube to the Euphrates. He builds mosques, bazaars, schools, and courts across these new lands. Justice is swift. Administration is sharp. The Sultan is not just a warrior. He is a ruler of people, cultures, and law, but even thunder has its silence. And fate once again takes a turn. From the east comes a storm fiercer than Bayezid himself, Timur the Lame, known to some as Tamerlane. A warlord of the Mongol tradition, Timur is forging a vast empire of his own, and he sees Bayezid not as a rival to respect, but as a challenge to crush. Letters are exchanged, insults follow, pride collides with pride. And soon, a new battle looms, not with the crumbling Byzantines, but with the raging East. In 1402, at the plains of Ankara, the two titans clash. Bayezid's army is tired, stretched thin from years of campaign. Timur's forces are fresh, cunning, and brutal. The battle is devastating. Betrayal from within Bayezid's ranks weakens the Ottomans, and in a tragic reversal, the Sultan, the Thunderbolt, is captured. Bayezid is taken prisoner, humiliated, before foreign eyes. He dies in captivity, broken in spirit, though never forgotten by history. The empire is thrown into chaos. A civil war known as the Ottoman Interregnum begins. Brothers fight brothers. Territories slip away. For a moment, it seems the dream of Osman may fade, but even broken thunder leaves behind the sound of power. And from the storm, a new sultan will rise, one who will not just siege Constantinople, he will conquer it. But for tonight, rest beneath the sound of distant thunder. Let Bayezid's boldness lull you into sleep. The empire breathes, wounded, but alive, and a new dawn is not far. The thunder has faded, but a new stillness arrives, the kind that comes after storm. Close your eyes now, as we meet the man who will restore balance to the shaken empire. It is the early 15th century. The once mighty Ottoman Empire lies fractured. The defeat at Ankara has left a wound that runs deep. Bayezid is gone, and his sons, Suleiman, Isa, Musa, and Mehmed each claim the right to rule. Brother fights. Brother, cities change hands. Loyalties shift like sand in the wind. The people, once proud and united, now live in uncertainty. Markets are quiet, borders are fragile, and above all, the dream of Osman feels far away. But in the midst of this chaos, one figure begins to rise, not with thunder, but with calm. Mehmed Çelebi, the fourth son of Bayezid. He does not seek the throne through arrogance or brute force. He chooses instead the path of wisdom and patience. From his base in Amasya, Mehmed watches, learns, and prepares. He waits not just for his moment, but for the right moment. Years pass. One by one his brothers fall. Some in battle, some by betrayal, others simply lose the will to rule. And by 1413, after nearly a decade of strife, Mehmed emerges as the sole ruler. A fragile empire is his to restore. He takes the title Mehmed the Fiend and becomes known as the Restorer. And restore he does. He does not rush into conquest. Instead, he rebuilds institutions. He re-establishes the central court. He reforms the army. He listens to scholars, to governors, to the voice of the people. He sends envoys to cities that had slipped away, offering peace instead of punishment. Many return willingly. Others are brought back with little blood. The empire begins to breathe. Again he supports poetry and architecture, funds madrasas and repairs mosques damaged by war. The pulse of the empire steadies, not in loud victory but in gentle recovery. He even re-establishes influence in Rumelia, the European wing of the empire, showing the world that the Ottoman presence is not only intact but enduring. Though his reign is short, just 8 years, Mehmed's impact is deep. He is not remembered for conquest or monuments, but for stability, for holding the empire together when it could have crumbled into dust. He dies in 1421, passing the crown to his son, a boy raised in a time of survival, who now must prove himself in a world that remembers thunder and war. That boy is Murad II, and as the next chapter begins, so too does the empire's march back toward greatness. But for now, let the stillness of Mehmed's reign settle over you. Let the quiet repairs, the humble diplomacy, the softened breath of the empire ease your thoughts. There will be battles again. There will be bold dreams. But tonight, we sleep under the care of a sultan who chose peace over pride. Now rest your thoughts, soften your breath, and let the rhythm of footsteps guide you to a time when a young sultan must prove himself, not just to the world, but to history itself. The year is 1421, and the empire holds its breath once more. With the death of Mehmed I, the task of rule passes to his son, Murad II, just 17 years old. He is thoughtful, curious, and raised with the stories of both chaos and unity. He knows what's been lost and what must be regained. But peace rarely lingers long in an empire that stretches across 2 continents. Even before Murad's coronation robes settle on his shoulders, rebellions rise. Her pretender to the throne, claiming to be another son of Bayezid, stirs unrest in Anatolia. The Byzantines, watching from Constantinople, offer him support, hoping to weaken the Ottomans once more. And in the west, Christian powers gather. In the eyes of Hungary and Venice, the Ottoman recovery under Mehmed I had gone too far. A rising empire must be stopped before it rises again. Murad is thrown into trial by fire. But like tempered steel, pressure makes him stronger. He first quells the rebellion in Anatolia with swift precision. The false prince is captured. The Byzantines, humiliated by their failed gamble, return to cautious silence. Then Murad turns to Europe. For nearly 2 decades, his reign becomes a dance of diplomacy, siege and war, particularly with Hungary under the brilliant general John Hunyadi, a man whose tactics would push the Ottoman forces to their limits. There are victories, like the capture of Thessaloniki, from the Venetians in 1430. There are setbacks, as alliances in Europe grow stronger, and in the background always is the whisper of Constantinople, still standing, still resisting, still waiting. But Murad is not just a warrior. He is also a statesman, a negotiator, and above all, a father. In 1444, weary of endless war, Murad does something almost unthinkable. He abdicates the throne. He hands power to his young son, a boy of just 12, whose name will someday shake the very foundations of the world. His name is Mehmed. Murad retreats to the quiet of Manisa, leaving behind the chaos of rule. But peace is short-lived. European powers, sensing weakness, break the truce. A crusade is launched, and the Ottomans, now led by a child, are at risk of collapse. The court sends word to Murad. They beg him to return, and so he does, not with bitterness but with resolve. In 1444, on the plains of Varna, Murad once again leads the Ottoman army. The Crusaders, under King Władysław of Poland and Hunyadi of Hungary, strike hard, but Murad strikes harder. The Ottomans win. The Polish king falls in battle. The crescent stands tall once more. Murad continues to rule for another decade, guiding his son and strengthening the empire's structure. Then, quietly, in 1451, he passes away. He leaves behind not only an empire that has endured, but a son ready to fulfill a destiny whispered across generations. For Mehmed II, the boy once deemed too young, is no longer a boy. He is now the conqueror, and his eyes, like so many before him, are fixed on Constantinople. But that is a tale for another night. So sleep now under the calming presence of Murad's legacy. Let your thoughts drift through his steady footsteps. The storms have cleared. The empire is prepared. And soon, a city will fall. Let your eyes grow heavy now. For the moment has come. A moment the world had awaited for centuries. The walls are high, the defenders proud, but destiny moves forward, quiet, steady, and unstoppable. It is the year 1451, and a new sultan ascends the Ottoman throne. He is just 19 years old, but behind those eyes is not a boy, it is a storm of vision, intellect, and certainty. His name, Mehmed II, and he will come to be known across the world as Fatih, the conqueror. From the moment he takes power, Mehmed is consumed by a single purpose: to finish what his ancestors began, to do what no ruler in 1,000 years had managed, to capture the unbreakable city, Constantinople. For over a millennium, the city has stood as the beacon of Christendom, the last flame of the Roman Empire. Its walls have survived sieges, earthquakes, and centuries of decline. But Mehmed does not see glory in history. He sees opportunity in vulnerability. He knows that to rule an empire worthy of legend, he must rule from a city worthy of legend. So, the preparations begin. First, he builds Rumeli Hizara, a massive fortress on the European side of the Bosphorus, facing his grandfather's Anadolu Hizara. Together, these twin castles strangle the city's lifeline. Trade is halted. Help cannot reach Constantinople by sea. Then come the cannons, not ordinary artillery, but monstrous creations forged by the Hungarian engineer Orban. These are weapons of a new age, capable of shattering walls that once stood for centuries. In April 1453, Mehmed moves. His army, estimated at 80,000 to 100,000 strong, surrounds the city. A force of men from all corners of his empire, joined together under the crescent flag. Engineers, gunners, sappers, soldiers, janissaries, all ready. Inside the city, Constantine III, the last Byzantine emperor, stands defiant. With only a few thousand defenders, Greeks, Genoese, and volunteers, he prays not for victory but for the strength to endure. And so the siege begins. Week after week, the Ottomans hammer the city's ancient walls. Cannonballs crash like thunder. Night. Attacks blaze with fire. The defenders hold on bravely and desperately, but Mehmed does not relent. When the great chain across the Golden Horn blocks his navy from entering, he does the unthinkable. He orders ships dragged over land, rolling them across logs and hills, bypassing the defenses completely. His fleet appears inside the Horn, a feat so shocking that even his enemies fall silent in disbelief. Still, the city holds, until the night of May 28, 1453. A hush falls across both camps. Prayers are whispered, Soldiers sharpen their blades. One last time, Mehmed walks among his men, not as a distant sultan but as a leader beside them. He says, "Tomorrow we take the city, or we die." And then, May 29th, before the sun fully rises, the final assault begins, wave after wave, crashes against the walls. Janissaries march in silence, then erupt into chants of faith. At last the walls begin to crack. A gate, the Kirka Porta, is breached. Ottoman soldiers pour through, the defenders collapse. And by noon, Constantinople falls. The city, once, the heart of empires, is now Ottoman, but Mehmed does not destroy it. He walks through the streets with awe. He declares that Hagia Sophia, once a cathedral, will be preserved, converted into a mosque, not torn down. He offers safety to the remaining people. He welcomes scholars, poets, artisans. He declares the city the new capital of the Ottoman Empire, and he renames it Istanbul. The world changes that day. One empire ends, another rises, more powerful, more diverse, and more enduring. And Mehmed, still only 21, becomes more than a ruler. He becomes a legend. Tonight, let the fee. Echoes of his footsteps on marble soothe you. Let the distant bells and calls to prayer merge into a lullaby of empire and eternity. Tomorrow we will see how Mehmed builds more than cities, how he shapes law, culture, and memory. But now, let your heart rest in the silence of conquered stone. The crescent moon glows above a new world. Let your body soften into the bed, and your thoughts drift like the Bosphorus current. The swords have been sheathed, and now a city begins to breathe under new rule, not in fear but in quiet rebuilding. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the world watches in stunned silence. But Mehmed II, now Mehmed the Conqueror, does not pause to bask in glory. He does not waste his time on vanity or vengeance. Instead, he opens his eyes to the broken city before him, and he begins to rebuild. He does not see ruins. He sees a blank canvas. His dream is not just of an empire ruled by force, but of a civilization ruled by law, knowledge, and order. So he begins crafting something far greater than conquest. He begins to design the very soul of the Ottoman state. First, he issues a sweeping legal code, the Kanuname-i Ali Osman, a foundational set of laws that blends Islamic principles with state rules. These laws bring structure to chaos. They outline rights, responsibilities, punishments, and protections. The empire becomes a place where justice is not guessed, it is written. Then comes the restoration of Istanbul. He calls architects, masons, and engineers from across the empire, and even beyond. Churches are preserved, mosques are constructed. Public baths, fountains, markets, and hospitals rise from the dust. The city, once divided by religion and class, now becomes a place of plurality. Muslims, Christians, Jews, and others, all living under one government, bound by tolerance and law. To Mehmed, a city without knowledge is lifeless. And so, he fills Istanbul with madrasas, Islamic schools that teach not just religion, but science, math, philosophy, and art. He invites scholars from Persia, Arabia, and even Europe. He reads Greek texts, studies Roman law, and funds translations of classical works. The young sultan who once stormed the walls now spends hours in libraries, searching for wisdom buried in words. But his ambitions are not confined to books. He expands eastward into Anatolia, bringing rival Turkish principalities under Ottoman control. He defeats remnants of the Byzantine resistance, secures Albania against the famous rebel Skanderbeg, and even faces off with Venice, asserting dominance over sea routes. Each move is part of a larger plan, not of chaos, but of architecture, of purpose. For Mehmed, every city conquered, every scholar hired, every stone laid, is a note in the great song of empire. He does not rule as a distant tyrant. He walks among his people in disguise. He listens to merchants, he visits markets, he asks questions. One day, he hears of a poor man wronged by a local judge. Instead of ignoring it, Mehmed brings the man to court and appears before the judge. As a subject, not a sultan. When the judge rules fairly, not swayed by power, Mehmed smiles, knowing justice is working, even against him. He continues like this for years, writing, building, listening, expanding. And though battles remain, though enemies gather at the edges, the heart of the empire beats strong. It is no longer the dream of a tribe or a dynasty. It is now a world of laws and libraries, of marble and ink, of justice and power. And through it all, Mehmed the Conqueror walks steadily, a scholar in a sultan's robe, a ruler who sees the future in both sword and scroll. Tonight let the calm of his vision cradle you. Feel the weight of books on shelves, the quiet scratch of ink across parchment, the warm sun on the stones of Istanbul's rebuilt mosques. Sleep now, under the watchful eye of a ruler who conquered not only a city, but ignorance, disorder, and time. Let your breath slow, the battles fade, and the page gently turns. The conqueror has passed, but his legacy echoes on. Now a softer hand takes the throne, one that values calm over conquest, peace over pride. It is 1481. The city of Istanbul mourns. The great Mehmed II, conqueror of Constantinople, architect of law and empire, has died. His death brings a stillness across the land. Soldiers lower their blades, scholars pause their writing, and in every mosque his name is whispered in prayer. But empires do not sleep for long, and soon a new sultan must rise. Two sons step forward, Bayezid and Cem. What follows is a bitter struggle, not of armies but of heirs. Cem, younger and bold, attempts to take the throne by force. But Bayezid, wise and patient, prevails. Cem flees, first to Egypt, then to Rhodes, and finally into exile under the custody of the Pope, a pawn in European politics, forever watching the empire from afar. Bayezid II, now sultan, is not like his father. Where Mehmed sought expansion, Bayezid seeks stability. Where Mehmed pursued glory, Bayezid pursues order. He does not raise new armies for conquest. Instead, he strengthens the heart of the empire, its cities, its people, its values. Under Bayezid, Istanbul flourishes. New mosques rise beside old churches. Bridges span waters once divided by war. The city becomes not only the seat of government, but a center of trade, art, and refuge. For this is the age when the Jews expelled from Spain, fleeing the Inquisition, find a safe home in the Ottoman Empire. Bayezid welcomes them with open arms. He sees their knowledge, their skills, their humanity. He does not ask their faith, only their peace. You call Ferdinand a wise king, Bayezid is said to have remarked, but he impoverishes his own kingdom and enriches mine. And so the empire becomes a haven, not just for the powerful but for the persecuted, not just for Muslims, but for Christians, Jews, and all who seek protection under law. Bayezid also invests in art, commissioning beautiful manuscripts, encouraging calligraphy, and expanding the imperial kitchens to feed the poor. He builds libraries, restores schools, and ensures the empire does not forget that greatness lies not only in battle, but in balance. Yet peace is never without shadows. Internal revolts stir. The Kuzilbash, a Shia movement in Anatolia, challenged the Sunni orthodoxy of the state. In the east, the Safavid dynasty begins to rise in Persia, a powerful Shia rival that will test Ottoman strength in years to come. But Bayezid, cautious, as ever, contains the unrest. He does not rush to war. He waits, he watches. And as the years pass, his reign is remembered as one of gentle strength. He rules for 31 years, longer than most sultans. And when his own sons begin to quarrel, for succession he quietly abdicates the throne to the strongest among them. Selim Bayezid does not die in palace glory. He dies on the road to retirement under quiet skies, but his legacy is lasting. He is the sultan who chose peace when war would have been easier. He is the ruler who opened doors when others closed them. He is the calm between two storms. And tonight, as you rest your head, imagine the golden domes of Istanbul reflecting moonlight on the Bosphorus. Feel the breeze that once carried exiles to safety. Hear the quiet prayers of a city at peace. You are safe. You are warm. And the story continues. Sink deeper now into the folds of night. The soft reign of Bayezid has passed, and a new sultan rises, fierce, focused, and filled with fire. The empire shifts, and the world holds its breath once again. It is the year 1512. The aging Bayezid has stepped down, and his son Selim takes the throne. Not gently, but with thunder in his voice and steel in his eyes. He is known as Yavuz Sultan Selim. To some, Selim the Grim. To others, Selim the Resolute. A man of few words, sharp decisions, and absolute authority. Selim is not interested in slow reform or distant diplomacy. He sees danger in every direction, and he moves to face it, with a pace and ruthlessness the empire has not seen since Mehmed the Conqueror. His first move is inward. He crushes any hint of rebellion, even within his own family. Brothers fall, rivals vanish. There is no space for uncertainty, only clarity carved by the blade. But Selim's gaze soon turns east, to the rising Safavid Empire in Persia. Ruled by Shah Ismail, a charismatic Shia leader, the Safavids threaten not only Ottoman territory, but Sunni Islam itself. Selim views it not just as a political threat, but a spiritual one. And so in 1514, he marches east, leading a massive army across the highlands of Anatolia to meet the Safavid forces. The two powers collide at Chaldiran near the Persian border. The battle is brutal. The Ottomans, armed with superior artillery and gunpowder, devastate the Safavid cavalry. Shah Ismail is wounded, his forces scatter, and the Ottomans claim a decisive victory. It is more than just a military win, it is a message that the Ottomans will defend their faith, their land, and their vision of Islam without compromise. But Selim is not finished. His march continues south, toward the crumbling Mamluk Sultanate, which still rules over Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. For centuries, the Mamluks had been powerful guardians of Islam's holy cities, Mecca and Medina, and the Caliphate, the spiritual leadership of the Muslim world, had remained in their care. But Selim believes the time has come. The Ottomans are strong, the Mamluks are weak, and history is ready for its next turn. In 1516, the two powers meet in battle once more, first in Majd Dabik, near Aleppo, then in Ridania, near Cairo. The Ottomans win both. The Mamluk Sultan is slain, and the doors of Cairo, the heart of the Arab world, open to the crescent. Selim enters the city not as a looter, but as a new guardian. He honors its scholars, he respects its mosques, and most of all, he brings something back with him to Istanbul, something that will change the Ottoman legacy forever. The title of Caliph, the symbolic leadership of the Muslim world, passed from the Abbasids through centuries, now rests with the Ottoman Sultan. And so Selim becomes not just a ruler of lands, but a commander of the faithful, a spiritual figure for millions, a unifier of Sunni Islam under a single imperial banner. His reign is not long, just 8 years, but in that short span he doubles the size of the empire. He expands into Persia, conquers the Arab world, takes control of Islam's holiest cities, and moves the Ottomans from regional power to global empire. He returns to Istanbul in 1520, weary, victorious, and quiet. Soon after, he falls ill in Maus and dies. No great ceremony, no long farewell, just a small worn prayer rug, a quiet passing, and an empire forever changed. Tonight, sleep under the vast shadow of Selim's world, a land that now stretches from Budapest to Baghdad, from Algiers to Mecca. Let your breath slow beneath the desert stars. Let the silence of the mountains wrap around you. The stage is now set for his son, greater still, to rise. Let the night grow quiet around you. For now arrives the Sultan who will lead not just with sword or scroll, but with brilliance, grace, and vision. The empire has reached its peak, and its heart now shines golden. It is 1520. The empire is vast. Its cities stretch across continents. Its armies command respect, and its flag waves above both deserts and seas. But it is not yet complete, not yet fully awake. That final transformation will come with Suleiman, the son of Selim, the grandson of Bayezid, the great-grandson of Mehmed the Conqueror. He is only 26 when he takes the throne, yet already refined, educated in law, fluent in multiple languages, calm in temperament but fierce when needed. He is unlike any ruler before him. He will be known in the West as Suleiman the Magnificent. In the east as Kanuni, the lawgiver. Under his reign, the Ottoman Empire will reach the height of its power, its most radiant age of art, architecture, law, and culture. But first, there is war. Suleiman begins his reign with an ambitious strike into Hungary, a kingdom strong, proud, and heavily fortified. At Mohacs in 1526, the Ottomans crush the Hungarian army in a swift and brutal victory. The king is killed. The Tui. Hungarian state collapses, and the gateway to Central Europe swings wide open. But Suleiman does not plunder blindly. He organizes, he installs governance, he makes the people feel not defeated, but protected. He marches to Vienna in 1529, and, though he fails to take the city, his message is clear. The Ottomans are no longer a distant empire. They are now a force knocking at the door of Europe itself. But Suleiman's strength is not just in conquest. Back home in Istanbul, he crafts a vision of empire that will endure for centuries. He calls upon his friend and chief architect, Mimar, Sinan, to build mosques and bridges so elegant they still rise today like prayers written in stone. He commissions the Süleymaniye Mosque, a crown of Istanbul's skyline, a place where faith meets beauty, where power humbles itself before God. He reforms the legal code, harmonizing Sharia law with the needs of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire. Christians, Jews, and Muslims live under a framework of justice, each protected by their own faith, but ruled by common fairness. His court becomes a center of philosophy, poetry, and debate. Persian poets, Arab jurists, European diplomats, all gather beneath his roof. He marries a woman unlike any before her, Hürrem Sultan, once a Christian captive from Ukraine, now his wife, advisor, and queen. Their love reshapes the palace, and her influence will ripple through generations. But even as his empire grows brighter, shadows remain. Rivals stir in Persia, in Spain, in the Indian Ocean. His once loyal friend, Ibrahim Pasha, is executed for betrayal. His own sons turn against one another in a bitter struggle for succession. The palace, though gilded, is not free from grief. Yet through it all, Suleiman endures, as a poet, a judge, a commander, a father. His heart bears the weight of power without breaking. He rules for 46 years, the longest of any Ottoman sultan, and when he dies in 1566, far from home, on the battlefield at Sigetvar, his soldiers weep. His empire bows in mourning. The world changes forever. For under him, the Ottoman Empire became not just great, but truly magnificent. Tonight, let your dreams rise with the domes of Istanbul. Let the gold of Suleiman's age warm your thoughts. Let his poetry echo softly in your chest. The world is a palace with no permanence, so be kind while you live, and just while you rule. And rest easy now, for the story still continues. Close your eyes now, and step into the quiet corridors of the imperial harem. For tonight's story is not of battlefields or armies, but of a woman who rewrote the rules of power from within the palace walls. Her name is Hürrem. To many she began as nothing more than a captive, a young girl of Ruthenian origin, taken from the steppes of modern-day Ukraine, sold into slavery, and brought across borders to the Grand Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. There she was just one of many girls placed in the service of the imperial harem, trained in court etiquette, music, languages, poetry, and submission. But Hürrem was different. Where others bowed, she observed. Where others obeyed, she thought. Her beauty was striking, but it was her mind that made her unforgettable. And soon she caught the eye of the most powerful man in the world, Suleiman the Magnificent. What began as fascination turned to affection, and what began as affection grew into a rare and powerful love. Suleiman, the Sultan known for discipline and poise, did something no Ottoman ruler had done before him. He freed Hürrem from slavery and married her. The court was stunned. For centuries, Ottoman sultans had children with concubines, never wives, to avoid the risk of political alliances and dynastic rivalries. But Suleiman changed the script, and in doing so did Hürrem. She became Hürrem Sultan, not just a royal consort, but a queen in all but name. From her private quarters in the harem, Hürrem began to influence the very course of the empire. She wrote letters to foreign leaders, not with softness, but with diplomacy and strategy. She advised Suleiman on internal matters, succession and court intrigues. Her words, always measured, always strategic, often found their way into the final decisions of the throne. She helped build charities, hospitals and mosques, including the Haseki Sultan Complex, a center for worship, healing and learning in Istanbul. She brought the female voice into the very architecture of empire, where marble met mercy and power wore the face of compassion. Yet her rise did not come without enemies. Within the harem, jealousy brewed. Courtiers whispered. Some accused her of manipulation, of controlling the sultan. And perhaps some of it was true. She played the game of power, not passively, but actively. She defended her children. She maneuvered against rivals, especially Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's closest friend and Grand Vizier, whose sudden downfall many would quietly link to her. But Hürrem was not cruel. She was calculating. In a world where women were expected to remain silent, she became the mother of a dynasty, planting the seeds of what would later be called the Sultanate of Women, an era where Ottoman queens, mothers and consorts would wield immense influence over politics and succession. And though she died in 1558, 8 years before Suleiman himself, she was buried not far from him. A place of honor no other consort had received before her. Together, in Istanbul's Süleymaniye complex they still rest, the Sultan and his queen. Tonight, as you breathe softly and the world fades away, imagine her writing by candlelight, her eyes steady, her voice calm, shaping decisions from behind the curtains of power. She was no warrior. She commanded no armies, but in the empire of hearts and minds, Hürrem Sultan reigned supreme, and the story of the Ottomans would never be the same again. Settle in now, as we step deeper into a quieter, softer battlefield. Not of swords, but of whispers. Not of marches, but of movements. For in the heart of the empire, behind the walls of marble and silk, a new age begins. The year is 1558. Hürrem Sultan has passed, but her legacy does not end with her final breath. In fact, it only begins to ripple outward, for the seeds she planted will blossom into a powerful chapter of Ottoman history, a chapter known as the Sultanate of Women. For over a century, beginning in the mid-1500s, the women of the imperial harem, wives, mothers and queens, will wield unprecedented power over the empire. They do not command armies. They do not sit openly on the throne, but from the hidden court of Topkapi Palace, they guide the course of history. It begins truly with Nurbanu Sultan, the wife of Selim II, son of Suleiman and Hürrem. Nurbanu, wise and sharp, navigates a palace steeped in competition. When Selim dies in 1574, their son Murad III becomes Sultan, but Nurbanu becomes something greater. She becomes Valide Sultan, the mother of the reigning Sultan. And in the Ottoman world, the Valide was often the most powerful figure behind the throne. Nurbanu manages palace affairs, appoints advisors and even communicates with foreign ambassadors, earning respect across both Islamic and European courts. After her comes another legendary woman, Kösem Sultan. Born to a humble family in the Greek Isles, Kösem enters the harem as a young girl, and like Hürrem before her, rises through intelligence and grace. She becomes the consort of Ahmed Furrah, and eventually the Valide Sultan to not one, but two sultans, her sons Murad IV and Ibrahim. During periods when the sultans were too young or unstable to rule, Kösem governed as regent, the true hand behind the empire's seal. Her influence stretches across decades. She manages foreign policy, negotiates peace, quells rebellions, and commands loyalty from generals and governors alike. But with power comes peril. Kösem, beloved by some, feared by others, is eventually caught in the deadly web of court politics. She is strangled in her chambers by orders of her daughter-in-law, Turhan Sultan, who would take her place as the next Valide, continuing the cycle of quiet power. And so the harem, often imagined as a place of passive beauty, becomes in truth a political institution. The women are not ornaments. They are strategists, negotiators, and patrons of the arts. They commission mosques, schools, hospitals, and fountains, their names etched in stone across the empire. They shape education. They influence succession. They create legacies. And, in a world that saw women as voiceless, the women of the Ottoman harem proved otherwise. But this age, too, will have its end. For with each generation, the center of power slowly returns to the sultans, and the walls of the harem begin to quiet. Still, the memory of the sultanate of women remains, a rare chapter in world history when queens ruled without crowns. Han shaped an empire through intelligence, influence, and invisible strength. Tonight, sleep under the silken shadows of these women's stories. Feel their presence, not loud, but deep, not seen, but felt. The halls of Topkapi are quiet now, but their footsteps remain. Let your thoughts soften now, for while the empire still shines, a slow dusk begins to gather at the edges. The palaces are still grand, the prayers still echo, but a quiet weariness settles in. A golden age never ends with thunder. It fades like a distant sunset. It is the early 1600s. The Ottoman Empire is still vast, still powerful. But something is changing. The rulers are no longer the likes of Suleiman, Mehmed, or Selim. They are no longer the visionaries who shaped law, conquered cities, and reformed the soul of the empire. Instead, the new sultans often rise too young, too isolated, or too unready. For generations now, princes have been raised not on the battlefield, but within the palace, in secluded chambers called the cafes, or cage. Designed to prevent bloody succession wars, these gilded prisons keep potential heirs locked away, safe from each other, but far from life. And so the empire begins to produce sultans who are untested, unsure, and often manipulated, the viziers. Once advisors, now act as regents. The janissaries, once disciplined warriors, grow powerful, political, and difficult to control. The court becomes a place of factions, whispers, and power plays. Outside the palace walls, the world is changing fast. The European powers, once cautious of Ottoman might, are now rising with fire in their hands and oceans at their feet. Spain and Portugal have opened new sea routes. The Dutch, English, and French carve global empires. The balance of power begins to shift, not by the sword, but by commerce, colonization, and technology. The Ottomans, rich in tradition, struggle to adapt. They cling to old systems while the world races ahead. And yet the empire does not collapse. It still holds territory from the shores of Algeria to the edges of Persia. Its cities still gleam, its bazaars still buzz, and its people still live, under relative stability. But the signs of decline are clear. Rebellions stir more often. The Sipahi cavalry, once the backbone of the Ottoman military, become less effective. The Janissaries, resistant to reform, turn against change. Wars with Austria, Persia, and Russia drain the treasury. Even within the capital, food shortages and inflation ignite unrest. And yet, within the empire's heart, there is still life, even. In this fading light, poets write, architects build, scholars debate, but the leadership falters, and as each sultan passes the throne to the next, the empire grows heavier with its own weight. It is not a collapse. It is a quiet sagging of greatness, like a great ship, still afloat but slow to turn. And in this new age, the Ottomans begin to look not outward, but inward, asking, what are we now? What will we become? Tonight, sleep beneath the veil of this soft turning. The empire still breathes, the mosques still rise, the call to prayer still echoes, but change is coming. And tomorrow we meet the men, who will try and sometimes fail to hold the empire together. Rest your head and listen closely now. For in this chapter, it is not a sultan who saves the empire, but a family of stewards rising in the sultan's shadow, grasping at the ropes of a ship drifting slowly toward the storm. It is the mid-1600s, and the Ottoman throne is quiet. The sultans who sit upon it are often distracted, inexperienced, or simply unwilling to rule with the fire of their forefathers. The court is bloated, the military restless. The empire, still vast, begins to strain under its own size. But when weakness lives at the top, sometimes strength must rise from below, and so enters the Köprülü family. Not kings, not conquerors, but viziers, administrators, reformers, and fixers. In 1656, the aging and exhausted empire turns in desperation to a seasoned statesman, Köprülü Mehmed Pasha. He is offered the role of Grand Vizier, but only on one condition, that the Sultan gives him full control without interference. The empire has nothing left to lose. They say yes, and Mehmed Pasha, old, sharp, and fiercely principled, takes the reins. He wastes no time. He cleans out corrupt officials, reforms the tax system, reorganizes the military, and restores discipline to the janissaries. He punishes those who exploit the empire's wealth and revives justice where it had faded. Then, with the core stabilized, he turns to war. He reclaims territories in Hungary, strengthens Ottoman control in the Balkans, and even begins preparations to challenge Venice and the Habsburgs once more. His rule is not gentle. It is not filled with poetry or grand ceremony, but it is effective. And for the first time in decades, the empire breathes easier. When Mehmed dies in 1661, his son, Köprülü Fazıl Ahmed Pasha, takes his place, and he continues the legacy, launching new military campaigns, particularly in Austria, and managing to capture Novi Zamki and other fortress cities. The empire, under the Köprülüs, feels revived. Not golden, but solid. Other members of the family follow. Köprülü, Mustafa Amcazade Hüseyin and others, each one trying to hold the line against Europe's rising powers, internal unrest and creeping stagnation. But the world is changing too fast. While the Ottomans look inward and backward, Europe is entering a new era of enlightenment, science, gunpowder strategy, and centralized power. The Köprülüs can slow the decline, but they cannot reverse it. Still, they are remembered with reverence, because sometimes, in the life of a great empire, it is not the age of glory that matters, but the age of preservation, when there is no new land to claim, no great sultan to celebrate, but simply the quiet, noble fight to not let it fall apart. Tonight, sleep in the care of these forgotten guardians, men who did not wear crowns, but who held up the ceiling with their bare hands. The empire remains. For now, let your breathing steady now, as we arrive at a crossroads. The empire still believes in its might, still dreams of glory, but not all dreams survive the dawn, and in the shadows of one great European city, the Ottoman world begins to slip. It is the year 1683. The Ottoman Empire has survived for centuries. It has conquered cities, toppled sultans, weathered revolts, and spanned continents, and yet deep within the palace halls, a hunger remains. One last hunger for conquest. One final ambition. The Habsburg Empire in Austria has grown bold. And Vienna, the glittering city of kings and music, stands like a stone in the path of Ottoman expansion into Europe. For decades, the Ottomans had marched deep into Hungarian lands. Now they turn again toward the gates of Vienna, not for defense, not for diplomacy, but for domination. And so the army gathers. An estimated 150,000 soldiers, Turks, Tatars, Arabs, and Balkan allies, march across the Danube. Led by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, the Ottomans move with great pageantry and confidence. Their cannons are strong, their banners wave proudly, but deep within this army, there is no sultan. The days of Mehmed the Conqueror and Suleiman, the Magnificent, where rulers led from the front, are long gone. Kara Mustafa Pasha is left to command in the name of the empire. He is skilled, but prideful. He believes Vienna will fall swiftly. It does not. From July to September, the siege drags on. The Ottomans batter the walls. They dig tunnels. They prepare for a final breach. Inside, the Viennese resist with all they have, citizens reinforcing. Walls, churches turned into infirmaries, cannons firing day and night. Then in the distance comes salvation. A relief army approaches. Poles, Germans, and Austrians unite. A rare Christian coalition, led by King Jan III Sobieski of Poland, a brilliant tactician and deeply devout warrior. On September 12th, at the Battle of Vienna. The Ottomans are caught between the city and the arriving army. The battle is ferocious, and then the largest cavalry charge in history begins. 1,000 Polish hussars, armored and fierce, descend from the hills, crashing into the Ottoman ranks. Like thunder, panic spreads. Ottoman lines collapse. Tents are abandoned. Cannons are seized. The army that once shook empires is routed. Kara Mustafa Pasha flees, his grand dreams of Vienna in ashes behind him. Weeks later, under imperial order, he is executed in Belgrade. A silken cord, the silent punishment of failure. And from that moment on, how the Ottoman tide begins to recede. The loss at Vienna is more than military. It is symbolic. It is the moment when Europe realizes the Ottoman advance can be stopped, and even pushed back. In the years that follow, territories are lost. Hungary, Transylvania, parts of the Balkans. The empire is still large, still rich, still proud. But now it no longer leads the rhythm of the world, it follows it. Tonight, sleep in the hush after battle. Feel the wind across the abandoned tents, the silence of dreams unfulfilled. The empire has not fallen, but the ground beneath it has shifted, and tomorrow it must decide whether to change or to cling to what was. Let your mind float now, from battlefields to gardens. The cannons are silent, and the fires of war cool for a time. The empire, wounded yet proud, turns inward, and in that pause something unexpected blooms. It is the early 1700s. The scars of Vienna remain. Territories have been lost. The confidence of old is cracked. But still, the Ottoman Empire stands. New generation of sultans emerges, men not of swords but of pens, men who no longer dream of Rome, but of revival, a rebirth of art, learning, and luxury within the empire's walls. This strange and beautiful moment is known as the Tulip Era, a time when the empire, for a brief shimmering moment, turns away from conquest and toward culture. It begins under Sultan Ahmed III, who comes to the throne in 1703. He is not a warrior, he is not remembered for battlefield victories, but he has vision, a desire to modernize without abandoning the past, and so he invites painters, poets, architects, and scholars into the palace. He looks toward Europe, not with suspicion but curiosity. Ambassadors are sent to Paris. French styles arrive in Istanbul. Delicate gardens, fountains, lacework, fashion, and above all, tulips. The tulip, native to Central Asia, had long been cherished in Ottoman gardens, but now it becomes a symbol of beauty, of refinement, of balance. Tulips bloom everywhere, in courtyards, on tiles, in miniature paintings and silk embroideries. They are traded, celebrated, bred with obsession. Some bulbs are sold for fortunes. Tulip festivals are held at night, where lanterns flicker over pools, music drifts through the gardens. And Istanbul forgets for a while the weight of empire. But this peace is delicate, for while the elite enjoy poetry and perfume, the common people grow restless. Taxes rise to fund luxuries. Janissaries are pushed aside for foreign advisors. And in the streets, whispers grow. Has the empire lost its purpose? In 1730, the tension erupts. A former janissary, Patrona Halil, leads a revolt, a strange and chaotic uprising of soldiers, traders, and discontented citizens. They storm the palaces. Fountains are smashed, gardens are burned, and the Tulip Era ends. Not with a slow fade, but in flames. Ahmed III is forced to abdicate. Many of his reformers are killed. And for a moment, the empire recoils from the idea of change, but the memory of the Tulip Era lingers, not just in broken gardens, but in the seeds it left behind. Seeds of curiosity, diplomacy, and the realization that the world beyond Ottoman borders can no longer be ignored. Tonight, let the soft petals of that forgotten age rest upon your thoughts. Imagine the tulips swaying in the moonlight, the calm waters of garden pools, the sound of a reed flute drifting through an open window, for even in decline, beauty bloomed. And tomorrow, we return to a world once again uncertain. Torn between tradition and transformation, rest deeper now, for the empire once more stands at the edge of change. The tulips have faded, but the idea remains. that to survive the Ottomans must evolve, and in a palace surrounded by old walls, a new mind begins to stir. It is the late 18th century. The Ottoman Empire is weary. Europe has surged ahead. Revolutions stir in France, America, and whispers of industry hum through the West. Meanwhile, in Istanbul, the empire still holds much of its territory, but its fleets are outmatched, its armies are outdated, and its bureaucracy bloated. And yet the one sultan sees it all with open eyes. His name is Selim III, and in 1789 he rises to the throne. He is thoughtful, poetic, and deeply aware of the gap between his empire and the modern world. Unlike many before him, Selim is not content with ceremonial power. He is determined to reform, and so begins the Nizam-ed-Jadid, the new order. He reorganizes the army. Inspired by European tactics, he creates a new corps trained in modern warfare and equipped with updated weapons. He builds modern barracks, orders translations of European military manuals, and brings in foreign instructors. A new treasury is formed to support these reforms, funded by new taxes and economic restructuring. He reforms the postal system, the education sector, and even tries to loosen the grip of the Janissaries, whose loyalty to tradition has turned into defiance against change. Selim dreams of a modern empire, still Islamic, still Ottoman, but awake to the realities of the age. He surrounds himself with intellectuals. He writes poetry, loves music, and keeps notes on everything from philosophy to Western science. But progress has enemies. The Janissaries, once the empire's elite, now see Selim's new order as a threat to their privilege. Conservative factions in the ulama, the religious elite, whisper that the reforms are foreign, dangerous, even heretical. And the provincial governors, long powerful and semi-independent, resist any attempt to centralize power. The palace becomes a cauldron of tension. Then, in 1807, it boils over. Led by reactionary forces within the Janissaries, a coup erupts. Selim is arrested, his reforms dismantled, his supporters hunted. A year later, in 1808, he is murdered in his cell. A quiet end for a visionary who tried to pull the empire into a new century. But his death is not the end of reform. It is only the beginning of the struggle between old and new, between memory and future. Selim's ideas, his vision of a modern military, efficient governance, and global diplomacy do not vanish. They will be revived, refined, and fought over, again and again. Tonight, let Selim's gentle voice lull you to sleep. Imagine him at his writing desk, penning verses of longing and hope, trying to bend time and tradition with only his thoughts. He was not a conqueror, not a warrior, but a reformer who dared to imagine an empire reborn. And though the light dimmed in his lifetime, it would one day return. Take a deep breath and feel the stillness before the storm. For the empire is about to break one of its oldest chains. The past will scream, but it will not survive. And from the fire, something new will rise. The year is 1808. The empire mourns the murder of Selim III. His reforms lie in pieces. The Janissaries, once protectors of the state, now act as its masters, resisting any change, strangling progress, and ruling through fear. But in the shadow of this chaos, a new sultan ascends the throne. His name is Mahmud II. He is quiet, at first, measured, careful, watching. He knows the fate of Selim, he knows the reach of the Janissaries, and he knows, if the Ottoman Empire is to survive, it cannot do so with the old guard standing in the way. So Mahmud begins with small changes. He trims the palace staff, modernizes the bureaucracy, creates new ministries. He wears Western-style clothes, shaves his beard, and encourages European manners at court, shocking many of the old elite. And while he moves, he waits, patient as a blade hidden in silk. Then, in 1826, the moment comes. He has quietly built a new army, the Asakir-i-Mansur-i-Muhammadiyeh, the victorious soldiers of Muhammad, trained in secret, loyal to the Sultan, ready. He knows the Janissaries will rise in anger, and they do. When Mahmud announces new military reforms, modeled after European systems, the Janissaries riot. They spill into the streets of Istanbul, burning homes, looting shops, and threatening the palace. But this time the palace is ready. Mahmud does not flinch. He gives the order. The imperial artillery turns on the Janissary barracks. The cannons thunder through the capital. The ancient Aga Mosque is stormed. The rioters are arrested, beaten, killed. By the end of the day, the Janissary Corps is dissolved, its name erased, its members imprisoned or executed. This moment is remembered in Ottoman history as the auspicious incident. It is not just a military victory. It is a rebirth. The single most powerful bloc to reform, the ancient core that once shaped the empire's expansion, has been removed. And now Mahmud moves quickly. He abolishes the traditional fez turban and replaces it with the modern fez, a sign of unity and equality. He reforms the tax system, centralizes the state, builds modern schools, and sends students to Europe. He forms new embassies, strengthens trade routes, and builds the first Ottoman newspaper. He even establishes a census, a tool of control and vision, to know exactly who lives within his empire. He does all of this knowing that time is short, that the empire no longer sets the pace. It tries to catch up. And when he dies in 1839, he leaves behind a changed empire, not yet modern, not yet safe, but free at last from the ghosts that once ruled it. Tonight, sleep in the calm after fire. The sound of cannons has faded. The old barracks are empty, and the empire, scarred but alive, walks forward. For the first time, unshackled. Sink into stillness now. For the fire of revolution has given way to paper, pen, and proclamation. The empire no longer dreams of conquering lands, it dreams of saving itself. And for that, it must change everything, or risk losing everything. It is 1839, and the empire stands at a fragile threshold. Mahmud II is gone. In his place rises his son, Abdülmecid I, just 16 years old. He does not have his father's fire. But he has something else, an open mind. And surrounding him are reformers, bureaucrats, diplomats, and scholars. Men who believe that survival lies not in swords, but in systems. And so begins the most ambitious reform movement the empire has ever seen. It is called the Tanzimat, reorganization. And it begins with a bold announcement. On a crisp day in November 1839, in the imperial rose garden of Gulhan, a declaration is read aloud to the public, the Gulhane Hatta Sharif. It promises things no empire this old has ever promised before: equality, before the law, regardless of religion, fair taxation and no more arbitrary confiscation of property, conscription reform, offering structured service instead of chaotic levies, security of life, honor and property, not just for Muslims, but for Christians and Jews too. The message is clear. The Ottoman state is trying to modernize, to civilize, to survive over. The next decades, the reforms multiply. A modern penal code is introduced, based partly on French law. A national education system is expanded with new secular schools and universities. Postal services, railways, and telegraph lines begin to connect distant provinces. Provincial governors are rotated to limit corruption. Modern ministries of finance, war, education, and justice are created. Even the once absolute power of the Sultan is now being questioned. Some reformers begin to whisper about constitutionalism, about representative government, about a state where law rules over men. But not all is peaceful beneath the polished marble. The old elite resent their loss of privilege. The religious scholars resist the rise of secular courts. In rural areas, peasants are unsure what these distant reforms mean for their lives. And then there is the external pressure. Britain, France, Russia, and Austria all keep watch, not to help the Ottomans, but to shape the empire in ways that suit their interests. The Ottoman Empire becomes known as the sick man of Europe, not because it is dying, but because every European power wants a piece of it. The empire fights, backed with treaties, alliances, diplomacy, but it is not easy. The Tanzimat brings change, but also confusion, progress, and pain. The empire is trying to become something new, not just Islamic, not just Ottoman, but a modern, multicultural state in a world that's moving faster than it can run. By the time Abdülmecid I dies in 1861, he leaves behind an empire no longer ruled by tradition alone. It has courts, trains, newspapers, passports, schools. It is not yet strong, but it is aware. And that awareness, that quiet hope that reform can lead to rebirth, will carry on through both tragedy and triumph. Tonight, let your thoughts drift through the grand halls of the sublime port, past inkwells and lanterns, through quiet offices where bureaucrats scribble drafts of a future yet to arrive. The empire at last is trying to catch up with time, and though the road ahead is steep, it is still walking. Breathe gently now. The winds of reform still stir the curtains of the palace. But a new figure stands at the threshold, watchful, calculating, with a heart both stirred by dreams and shadowed by fear. The age of hopeful. Change meets the age of cautious control. It is the year 1876. The empire, after decades of reform, stands on uneasy ground. The Tanzimat era has brought railroads, schools, and laws, but also debt, discontent, and growing foreign interference. People whisper. The bureaucrats worry. The European powers circling like hawks wait for weakness, and into this world steps Abdülhamid II. He is thoughtful, sharp-eyed, raised on poetry and politics, and when he ascends the throne, he is greeted not with ceremony, but with a crisis. Just weeks earlier, a group of reformers had forced the creation of a constitution, the Kanun-e-Esasi, the first in Ottoman history. It promises an elected parliament, limits the power of the Sultan, and speaks of liberty, justice, and national unity. For a moment, hope returns. A new era begins, the first constitutional period. But that moment is short. A war with Russia erupts in 1877, bloody and humiliating. The empire loses territory in the Balkans. Thousands die, millions flee as refugees, and in the face of this collapse, Abdülhamid acts. He dissolves the parliament, suspends the constitution, and assumes absolute control. Many are shocked, but Abdülhamid does not flinch. For the next 33 years he rules with firm grip, not as a figurehead but as a true autocrat. He strengthens the secret police, censors the press, exiles critics, and yet he is not cruel for cruelty's sake. Abdülhamid believes that only centralized power can save the empire from decay, that too much freedom too fast will tear the state apart. And under his rule the empire stabilizes, at least on the surface. He builds hundreds of schools, especially in science and medicine. He funds the Hijaz Railway, connecting Damascus to Medina, a symbol of Islamic unity. He promotes pan-Islamism, presenting himself as the caliph of all Muslims, hoping to unite the Ummah under one banner. To the west, he is called the Red Sultan, feared and ridiculed. But in the east, millions see him as a protector of faith. Still, his empire continues to shrink. The Bulgarians, Serbs, Montenegrins, and Greeks press for independence. The British occupy Egypt, the Italians seize Libya, and always beneath the palace floors, the murmurs of opposition grow louder. Young intellectuals, educated in Europe, inspired by liberty, begin to organize. They call themselves the Young Turks, and they want the constitution restored. In 1908, they force Abdülhamid's hand. Faced with growing unrest and rebellion, he reinstates the constitution and recalls parliament. But it is too late. In 1909, after a failed counter-revolt, Abdülhamid is deposed quietly without blood. He is exiled to Thessaloniki, then Istanbul, where he dies in 1918, just before the final collapse of the empire. His rule remains one of contradiction, a time of tight control, yet also intellectual awakening, a period of fear, yet also of construction, a reign that tried to hold the empire together, but could not stop time. Tonight, rest beneath the long shadow of a sultan who tried to slow the clock, who guarded his empire like a father guards a flickering flame. The world around him changed, and now it begins to shatter. Tomorrow we enter the storm, the age of revolution, War and final reckoning. Breathe slowly now. The palace walls tremble, and distant cannons begin to stir. The empire's long twilight nears its end. New voices rise, bold, impatient, certain, but not all revolutions bring renewal. Some lead only to fire. The year is 1909. Abdul Hamid II has been deposed. The Young Turks, a coalition of reformist intellectuals, officers and exiles, have taken control. They promised freedom, justice and modernization, the restoration of the constitution, a stronger parliament, a more equal empire. But once in power, they learn a hard truth. Reform is not the same as rule. The empire is no longer a sleeping lion. It is a wounded deer, surrounded by hungry wolves. The Committee of Union and Progress, KIUP, the core of the Young Turks, begins centralizing power. It is no longer enough to reform. They must control. Ethnic tensions rise. Armenians, Arabs, Kurds, Greeks all demand autonomy or rights. But the KIUP fears disintegration, so they turn to Turkification, an attempt to build a single unified Ottoman identity rooted in Turkish language, loyalty and nationalism. And in this pressure, the empire begins to crack. In 1912, the Balkan Wars erupt. Serbia, Greece, Bulgaria and Montenegro unite to drive the Ottomans out of Europe. The empire, once the master of the Balkans, loses nearly all its European territories in just a few months. Thessaloniki, Skopje, Monastir, Edirne, all lost or contested. Millions of Muslim refugees flee westward, bringing with them grief, poverty and deep resentment. The loss is not just land, it is identity. It is the soul of an empire shrinking before its own eyes. The Young Turks, humiliated and desperate, look for salvation. And they find it in war. In 1914, the First World War explodes across Europe. Austria, Hungary and Germany battle against Russia, Britain and France. The Ottomans choose Germany. Some hope it will revive the empire's strength. Others see it as a chance to strike at old enemies. And so in the winter of 1914, the Ottomans enter World War I. What follows is disaster. The Caucasus front collapses under Russian pressure and bitter cold. The British take Basra, then Baghdad, then Jerusalem. The Arab revolt, led by Sharif Hussein and backed by the British, rises in the Hejaz, tearing the empire from within. And then there is something darker. In 1915, fearing rebellion from Armenian communities near the Russian border, the KIUP orders the deportation of hundreds of thousands. What begins as relocation becomes massacre. Villages are emptied. Caravans are sent into deserts without food. Execution, starvation, disease. By the end, over 1 million Armenians are dead. The world watches, horrified. And the Ottoman government, fragmented and afraid, tries to erase what it has done. The war rages on. But the empire is broken, inside and out. In 1918, the Ottomans surrender. The armistice of Mudros ends their role in the war, but it is not peace, it is occupation. Allied troops enter Istanbul. The empire's heart is now a puppet, watched over by foreign flags. The Young Turk leaders flee. The dream of revival dies with them. And now, only one act remains. The final, painful unraveling. Tonight, sleep gently, not with the noise of war, but with the quiet sadness of a story near its end. The Ottoman Empire still breathes, but just barely. Tomorrow we witness its final fall and the birth of something new. Breathe gently. The empire's breath is faint now. The once mighty crescent that cast its light across continents flickers in twilight. But in the quiet collapse, a new flame is lit, not of empire but of nationhood. It is 1918, the Great War is over. The Ottoman Empire, so bruised, exhausted and dismembered, signs the armistice of Mudros. Its armies are dissolved, its ports and railways are seized, and its once sacred capital, Istanbul, is occupied by British, French and Italian forces. The Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed Zixix, remains, but only in name, powerless, surrounded by foreign uniforms, presiding over a court that now lives in silence. The Treaty of Sèvres, signed in 1920, cuts the empire apart. Arab provinces are carved away. The Greeks are promised Smyrna. Armenians are offered a homeland. The straits are to be internationalized. There is barely anything left of what once was. But in the heart of Anatolia, a new resistance stirs, led not by sultans, not by pashas, but by a soldier, stern, secular, and full of fire. His name is Mustafa Kemal. He is a decorated Ottoman officer, a hero of Gallipoli, and a man who believes not in patching the empire, but in replacing it. In 1919, he travels to Samsun. From there he begins to gather loyal officers, villagers, intellectuals, anyone who still believes that the soul of Anatolia is not for sale. The movement spreads. From Sivas to Erzurum, from Ankara to Konya. In 1920, the Grand National Assembly is formed in Ankara, declaring itself the true government of the Turkish people. War follows, not just of survival, but of liberation. Against the Greeks who land in Smyrna with Allied blessing, against Armenian forces in the east, against French troops in the south, against collaborators who side with the old empire or foreign occupiers. In 1922, after years of brutal struggle, the Greeks are defeated. The poor city of Izmir is reclaimed, the Sultan's government is discredited, and the Ottoman Sultanate, after over 600 years, is officially abolished. Mehmed VI flees Istanbul aboard a British warship, never to return. The curtain falls, but the stage is not empty. In 1923, a new state is declared, the Republic of Turkey. Its capital, Ankara. Its president, Mustafa Kemal, now given the name Ataturk, father of the Turks. He moves quickly to shape a modern secular nation. The caliphate is abolished in 1924. Islamic courts and religious schools are closed. The Latin alphabet replaces Arabic script. Western dress is encouraged. Women are granted rights and education. The old fezes are discarded for hats. It is radical. It is controversial. And for many it is painful. But Ataturk is unshaken. He says, peace at home, peace in the world. He does not rebuild an empire. He builds a republic, grounded not in conquest, but in citizenship, law, and modernity. The Ottoman palaces still stand, but their halls are silent, their thrones are empty, their stories are now history. Tonight, sleep in the shadow of transformation. Feel the silence after centuries of rule. The calm after collapse. The quiet power of a people who rose again, not with empire, but with identity. The stars still shine over Istanbul. But they now look down on something new. Tomorrow, the epilogue. And now we rest in the echo. The story is told. The battles are over. The flags have changed. But the shadow of the empire still lingers, not in war, but in memory, woven quietly into the fabric of our world. For over 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire shaped history. From the wild grasslands of Soyut to the heart of Vienna, from the golden minarets of Istanbul to the sacred sands of Mecca and Medina. Its reach was vast, its influence deep. But what remains? Today the sultans are gone. The palaces are museums. The janissaries no longer march. The Tukhra seals no longer sign decrees. Yet, look closely, and the empire breathes still. In language, where Turkish, Arabic, Persian, and Balkan words blend into each other like old friends. In architecture, where domes rise gently over cities from Bosnia to Syria, a style born of Sinan's dreams still touching the sky. In law, where systems created during the Tanzimat reforms echo in modern Turkish courts and beyond. In food, where the dishes of palace kitchens, pilav, börek, dolma, are now everyday meals across continents. In music, in calligraphy, in poetry, in the tiles of a prayer niche, in the quiet of an early morning bazaar, in the rhythm of tea poured in small glasses, in the lanterns of Ramadan, in the stories grandmothers still tell to lull children to sleep, and in the most human way of all, those in the people. The descendants of Ottomans now live across dozens of modern nations. They speak different tongues, follow different customs, hold different dreams. But the lines of connection are still there, in hearts, in names, in blood, in soil. The Ottoman Empire was not just a political force, it was a civilization, one that wrestled constantly with justice and power, with tradition and change, with unity and diversity. It gave refuge to the expelled, it governed the devout and the doubting, and at its best, it tried to hold many peoples under one sky. Was it always kind? No. Was it always wise? No, but it was human, grand, flawed, and unforgettable, and like all great stories, and it ended. But not in silence. In transition, from sultans to citizens, from crescent to republic, from memory to meaning, tonight as you. Close your eyes. Know that you have walked through 600 years of memory. You've seen empires rise, cities fall, and dreams reshape the world. And now, all is still. Let the domes of Istanbul cradle the stars above you. Let the ghost of call to prayer whisper peace into your ears. Let the river of time carry you gently into sleep. The story of the Ottoman Empire is complete, but its spirit lives on in every dawn touched by the East and every dusk kissed by history. Good night, and thank you for listening. Close your eyes once more and imagine a city unlike any other, a city that has worn the crown of 3 empires, a city where church bells once echoed across hills, and where now the muezzin's call gently rises with the dawn. This is Istanbul, once Byzantium, once Constantinople, and through centuries, always a crossroads. It was never just a capital, it was the soul of the empire. On one side, Europe. On the other, Asia, divided by the Bosphorus. Yet united by spirit. By the 17th century, Istanbul had grown into one of the largest, most diverse cities in the world. Its skyline glittered with the domes and minarets of masterpieces like the Blue Mosque, the Süleymaniye, and Hagia Sophia. Its neighborhoods buzzed with life. Muslims, Christians, and Jews living side by side in winding streets and wooden homes. The city was full of contradiction. Regal, yet chaotic. Spiritual, yet worldly. Silent in its mosques. Noisy in its markets. In the Grand Bazaar, merchants from Persia, India, Egypt, and the Balkans traded silks, spices, and stories. In coffeehouses, poets shared verses, thinkers debated law and faith, and gossip swirled like the smoke above their cups. There were palaces of gold, and courtyards filled with laughter. There were libraries filled with ancient texts, and kitchens preparing feasts for thousands. Istanbul was the empire in miniature, every class, every tongue, every dream, and no matter how far the sultan's armies marched, no matter what treaties were signed or lands lost, this city remained the empire's heart, a place where history rested like dust on every stone, where past and present walked the same streets, where empires rose and still whispered. Tonight drift gently through her moonlit alleys. Feel the cool marble of her mosques beneath your fingertips. Listen to the water lapping against her shores, for in every breath she remembers. Let your mind soften, and listen not for footsteps or battles, but for the gentle rustle of a reed pen gliding across paper, and the soft breath of a poet reciting to the night. For some empires leave monuments in stone, and some leave verses in the soul. The Ottoman Empire was forged with steel, but it was remembered through words, music, and color. From its earliest days, the Ottomans were not just conquerors, they were curators of beauty, of rhythm, of harmony, of balance. Poetry was not a luxury. It was a language of state, of spirit, of self. Every sultan, from Mehmed the Conqueror to Suleiman the Magnificent, wrote poetry under pen names. Suleiman, as Muhibbi, left behind hundreds of verses, of longing, of wisdom, of power wrapped in vulnerability. His lines were not written for armies, but for lovers, for God, for the stars. In courtly circles, poets were honored alongside generals, their words carved into marble, embroidered into silk, or sung in the late hours of the evening. And beyond poetry, there was calligraphy. The Ottomans believed that writing, especially of divine verses, was not just communication, it was art. Scripts like Diwani, Thuluth, and Naskh flowed like rivers on paper, each curve and flourish a reflection of the soul behind the ink, Mosques bore inscriptions not just to teach, but to move, to draw the eye and then the heart, and in the courts of Topkapi, music floated through the halls, ney flutes, ouds, qanuns, and drums weaving together the melodies of the East and West. There were songs of praise, songs of grief, and songs of quiet reflection played under the shade of fig trees, in gatherings where emotion flowed as freely as tea. In miniature paintings, history came alive, not in grand perspective, but in rich, flat color and storytelling detail. Scenes of battles, festivals, processions, and courtly life, captured in tiny strokes with brushes finer than a strand of hair. This empire was not only seen, it was felt, in rhythm, in verse, in silence between notes. Tonight, drift into that quieter empire, where the sword rests and the pen rises, where a sultan writes verses for a rose, where a dervish spins for eternity, where beauty is not power, but peace. Sleep now within the poetry of a forgotten age, let your breath deepen. And picture, stone not as cold or hard, but as something soft, shaped by vision, lifted by faith. Tonight we step into the empire's greatest legacy of silence and space, crafted by hands that spoke through arches, domes, and light. His name was Mimar Sinan, born to humble beginnings in the early 16th century, raised as a Christian in Anatolia, taken as a boy into the Devshirme system, and trained first as a soldier, but destined for something far greater. He became not a man of war, but a builder of wonder. Under the rule of Suleiman the Magnificent, Sinan rose to become the chief architect of the Ottoman Empire. For over 50 years he would shape its sacred heart, building more than 300 structures, mosques, bridges, schools, palaces, aqueducts, but his soul lived in mosques. He believed architecture was more than function. It was devotion made visible. In Edirne he built the Selimiye Mosque, his masterpiece, his prayer in stone. Its vast dome, even larger than Hagia Sophia's, seems to float like a cloud. Its minarets pierce the sky like whispered supplications. Its inner space feels infinite. In Istanbul, he left behind the Süleymaniye Mosque, commissioned by the Sultan he loved most. Built not only for worship, but for community. It was a complex of baths, libraries, hospitals, and kitchens. Sinan did not just build structures, he built experiences, places where light flows like water, where sound travels in perfect circles, where each curve, each tile, each shadow invites reflection. His secrets? Careful mathematics, endless patience, and a reverence for space. He studied the Roman aqueducts. He walked through Byzantine basilicas, but he always returned to one question: how can architecture lift the soul? And so he built with harmony, symmetry, gentle power. His mosques are still alive, not just as museums, but as places of breath, of prayer, of pause, and long after his passing in 1588, when empires crumbled and borders shifted, his structures stood not just as Ottoman, but as eternal. Tonight, imagine the hush inside a Sinan mosque, the air cool and still, the light golden filtering through latticed windows, the dome above you, vast, quiet, endless. You are safe there. You are small and whole. Sleep now beneath the arch of memory. For some legacies are not carved in marble. They are carried in feeling. Tonight we open the gates of history's most silent army. You will not hear their voices. You will not see their rage. But you will feel their shadow, marching quietly through centuries until their pride shattered the very empire they once served. The story begins long before power, long before rebellion, long before ruin. In the early days of the Ottoman state, when it was still a sliver of territory on the edge of Byzantine lands, the sultans realized something vital. Loyalty cannot be inherited. It must be shaped. And so they created something the world had never truly seen: a new army, one not born of tribal loyalties or family bloodlines, one designed from the ground up, trained, disciplined, and molded for obedience. They called it the Kapakulu Ochar, the core of the Sultan's door, but history remembers them by a simpler name, the Janissaries. Derived from the Turkish Yeniçeri, new soldier, they were at first nothing more than boys, taken through the system called Devshirme, or the blood tax, Christian families in the Balkans, Greek, Albanian, Serbian, Bosnian, were required to give up a son. These boys were between the ages of 8 and 14. They were healthy, intelligent, spirited. Selected not for who they were, but for who they could become, and so they were taken. Not with cruelty, not with kindness, with order, with ritual. From villages nestled in green hills, from homes surrounded by vineyards and chapels, they were led away by Ottoman officials into the unknown. But this was not slavery. Not quite. They were brought to Istanbul, to Anatolia, to training camps hidden in the heart of the empire. There, they were converted to Islam, taught Turkish, Arabic, and Persian, taught to read and write, taught mathematics, logic, and court, etiquette, and above all, taught discipline. Their new lives were not soft. They woke before dawn. They marched in silence. They trained with bow, sword, spear, and eventually gunpowder. They learned to obey, not just orders, but the very idea of order. They belonged to no family but the state, no loyalty but the sultan, no life but the mission, and in time they became the most feared force in the empire. An elite corps, a silent blade. They were the first to march into battle, the last to retreat, clad in long white robes, tall felt hats, and carrying muskets when the world still fought with swords. Other armies looked on in awe. How did a force so clean, so calm, move with such precision? How could a Christian boy taken from his village become a man who would die for a Muslim ruler with no hesitation? The answer lay not just in training, but in transformation. The Janissaries weren't just fighters. They were a system, an idea. A myth made real. Their barracks became places of ritual, their food eaten in silence, their brotherhood fierce. Their songs, when sung, were full of pride, duty, and fire. When Mehmed the Conqueror breached the walls of Constantinople in 1453, the Janissaries led the charge. When Selim marched east to battle the Safavids, they held the lines. When Suleiman rode into Hungary, they stood at the front, flanked by cannons and banners, silent as stone. They were given privileges, extra rations, special pay. They were forbidden to marry, forbidden to work side jobs, because they were not citizens. They were weapons. But as the centuries passed, something changed. Power, once earned, became expected. Pride, once sacred, became arrogance. And slowly, quietly, the Janissaries began to forget what they were. They began demanding more pay, more say in politics, more influence in court. They began taking bribes, using their strength not to defend the empire, but to control it. By the 17th century, they were no longer celibate, no longer focused. They married, they opened shops, they joined guilds. They formed factions. The barracks that once echoed with prayer and drill now echoed with argument and wine. Sultans began to fear them, because every new reform, every modern idea, was blocked by the Janissaries. New weapons, rejected. New training, refused. New taxes, resisted. And when sultans pressed too hard, the Janissaries rebelled. They stormed palaces, overthrew grand viziers. In some cases, they even murdered sultans who challenged their privilege. The empire's greatest defenders had become its most dangerous threat. By the time of Selim III in the late 1700s, it was clear the Janissaries were a wall standing between the Ottoman Empire and the modern world. Selim tried to reform them, tried to create a new order army, and for that he was killed. But his ideas lived on, and when his nephew Mahmud II came to power, he made a decision. It was not enough to weaken the Janissaries. They had to be removed. In 1826, under the guise of a new training system, Mahmud challenged them again. The Janissaries revolted as expected, but this time the Sultan was ready. He unleashed his loyal troops. He ordered the use of artillery, and in the center of Istanbul, the ancient Janissary barracks were bombarded, burned, and destroyed. Thousands died. The survivors were arrested or exiled. The corps was officially abolished. The event was named the Auspicious Incident. It was the end of the Janissaries, and with it, the end of the empire's old self. They had begun as orphans, raised to protect. They ended as masters, destroyed. by their own greed, but still their legacy lingers. In Turkish, the word Yeniçeri still echoes with awe. In museums, their tall white hats sit in glass cases, watched by children who can't imagine their silence. In military history, they remain one of the first professional standing armies the world had ever seen. They were brothers forged by fire, guardians shaped by faith and discipline, and finally, victims of time. Tonight, let your mind drift into their barracks before the end. Hear the quiet breath of sleeping soldiers, smell the oil on their swords, feel the weight of their silence. An empire is more than battles, more than sultans. It is shaped by those who follow orders, and by those who one day refuse them. Sleep now, under the hush of a vanished regiment. Their march is over. Let your thoughts soften now and rest beneath the soundless echo of prayer. For while swords and thrones often draw the eye, it is faith that shaped the rhythm of Ottoman life. Not loud, not forced, but constant, like the flow of a river beneath the palace floor. The Ottomans were many things: warriors, diplomats, builders, but at their core they were Muslims, and Islam from the earliest days of Osman was more than belief. It was the thread that stitched the empire together. From village markets to marble courts, from desert caravans to gilded mosques, Islam was not just practiced, it was lived. But the Ottomans did not invent their faith, they inherited it. Rooted in the Sunni tradition, the Ottoman Empire saw itself as the guardian of Islam, and over time its most powerful political representative. Yet their faith was never monolithic. It was layered, flexible, sometimes contradictory, but always present. Let's step back to the early days, when Osman and his successors ruled a small frontier state. The Ottomans emerged during the fall of the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, in Namisexta, a time when Anatolia was a mosaic of Muslim and Christian states. Faith was part of every decision. Osman surrounded himself with ghazis, warriors motivated by both conquest and religion. These were not mercenaries. They believed in a holy mission: to expand Islam, protect the faithful, and purify the land. So as the Ottomans expanded into Byzantine lands, they framed their fight not just as imperial ambition, but as jihad. This gave them purpose, gave their people unity, and gave their conquests meaning. But the Ottomans were not rigid. They did not force conversion on the Christians they conquered. Instead, they governed with a system of religious plurality. This system, called the millet system, allowed non-Muslim communities to practice their faiths freely: Orthodox Christians, Armenians, Jews. They all lived under Ottoman rule. With their own courts, schools and leaders, they paid a jizya, a tax on non-Muslims, but in return they were protected. To some, this was tolerance. To others, pragmatism. Either way, it worked. The Ottomans ruled not by destroying diversity, but by managing it. Still, at the center stood Islam, as both a spiritual compass and a state structure. Every Ottoman sultan carried two titles: Padishah, Emperor of the worldly realm; Caliph, Commander of the faithful. This second title, Caliph, grew in importance after 1517, when Selim the Grim conquered Egypt and took custody of Mecca, Medina, and the Abbasid Caliphate. With that, the Ottomans became not just rulers of land, but stewards of the Islamic world. They controlled the holy cities. They financed the Hajj. They printed Qurans. They sent aid to distant Muslim communities in India, Africa, and Southeast Asia. In Istanbul, the Sultan would attend Friday prayers at a different mosque each week, a symbol of unity, strength, and humility. But Islam was not just in rituals. It shaped the law. The Ottomans governed with a blend of Sharia and Qanun. Sharia, religious law derived from the Quran and Hadith. Qanun, secular law issued by the Sultan for state affairs. Together they formed a system both sacred and adaptable. Courts applied both sets of laws, with qadis, Islamic judges, deciding disputes over marriage, inheritance, and morality. These qadis were not mere clerics. They were trained scholars, respected across the empire. Their decisions were binding, their voices powerful. Even sultans at times respected their rulings. The empire also supported a rich network of madrasas, religious schools. These were not just centers of memorization. They taught grammar, rhetoric, logic, geometry, astronomy, and more, blending classical Islamic learning with practical state needs. Scholars were trained not just to pray, but to govern. And yet, despite its structure, Ottoman Islam was far from uniform. The empire was home to Sufi orders, mystical brotherhoods that emphasized inner purity, music, and love of God. The Mevlevis, followers of Rumi, spun in meditation, their white robes flowing like clouds, their hearts beating in rhythm with divine love. The Bektashis, often close to the Janissaries, practiced an esoteric Islam that drew from Shia and folk traditions. These groups built tekkes, lodges, of worship, music, and service. They attracted farmers, artisans, poets, and outcasts. They provided meaning for the masses, and in some cases challenged the rigid scholars of the court. For the Ottomans, this diversity was not always comfortable, but it was real. There were also tensions with Shia Islam, especially with the Safavids of Persia. The two empires, Sunni and Shia, clashed for centuries, not just over land but over legitimacy. The Ottomans framed themselves as the defenders of Orthodox Islam. The Safavids, they claimed, were heretics. This conflict bled into policy, law, and war. But it also sharpened Ottoman identity. And yet, despite all the power, faith was not always triumphant. By the 19th century, as the empire weakened, faith became a tool of survival. Sultans like Abdulhamid Seku revived the caliphate as a symbol of global unity. They hoped to rally Muslims across colonial lands, India, Egypt, Sudan, against Western imperialism. It was sincere, but also strategic. And when the Ottoman Empire finally collapsed after World War I, the faith it once carried was cast into uncertainty. In 1924, the Caliphate, the symbol of Islamic unity for over a millennium, was abolished by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. It was the end of a sacred era. Yet faith did not vanish. The mosques still stood. The Qurans were still recited. The prayers still rose 5 times a day. Islam had been the spine of the empire. And even without the empire, the spine remained. Today, you can still walk into a mosque built by Sinan and hear the same verses that echoed centuries ago. You can still find handwritten Qurans from Ottoman calligraphers, as precise and beautiful as woven silk. You can still smell the incense, feel the cool marble. Close your eyes and hear the footsteps of believers. On ancient rugs, faith never really dies. It just finds new names, new shapes, new voices. Tonight, rest in the warmth of that continuity. Let the rhythm of the adhan and the call to prayer lull you to sleep. Let the quiet recitation of sacred verses soothe your breath. For the Ottoman Empire, through all its rise and fall, was always rooted in something deeper than politics. It was rooted in the soft, enduring power of belief. Drift now. Let the waves rock you gently, not with storm but with strength. Tonight we follow the empire to sea, across deep blue waters where silence is broken only by sails, and the memory of empires is carried on salt and wind. When we think of the Ottoman Empire, we often imagine deserts, domes and marching soldiers, but there is another face to the empire, one that sailed, battled, traded, and explored across vast seas. The Ottomans were not just masters of land, they were guardians of the water. Let's set our course toward the Mediterranean, the sea between continents, a bridge between cultures, and for centuries, the most contested water in the world. The Ottomans understood this, and from the early 16th century, they poured their energy into creating one of the world's most powerful navies. Their fleets would dominate the Mediterranean, the Aegean, the Red Sea, and even the Indian Ocean. Their sailors would battle pirates, crusaders, and rival empires. Their admirals would become legends, feared from Venice to Portugal. But first, the empire had to look west. It was under Selim I, the conqueror of Egypt and the Hijaz, that the Ottomans began turning more seriously to maritime power. He understood that controlling the Red Sea was vital for protecting pilgrimage routes and Islamic trade. He built up ports in Suez and Jeddah, sending fleets to patrol against Portuguese incursions. But it was Suleiman the Magnificent who truly brought the Navy to life, his secret. He didn't start from scratch. He turned to a man already feared across the seas. A pirate, a corsair, a sailor turned statesman, Hayreddin Barbarossa. Born in the late 1400s on the island of Lesbos, Barbarossa began as a privateer, attacking Christian ships, raiding coastal towns and gaining riches and reputation. But he was more than a pirate. He was a strategist. And when he pledged allegiance to Suleiman, the empire gained more than a fleet. It gained a master of the Mediterranean. Appointed Capudan Pasha, or Grand Admiral, Barbarossa transformed the Ottoman navy into a disciplined, deadly force. His flagship flew the crescent, his sails were black and gold, and his cannons spoke with thunder. In 1538, at the Battle of Preveza, Barbarossa defeated the mighty Holy League, a coalition of Spanish, Papal, Venetian, and Genoese fleets. With that single victory, the Ottomans secured dominance of the Eastern Mediterranean for decades. They seized islands, protected Muslim trade, raided the coasts of Italy and Spain, and ensured that Istanbul's power reached far beyond its walls. The navy was not just military, it was also economic. Ottoman ports like Izmir, Thessaloniki, Alexandria, and Algiers became hubs of global trade. Spices from India, silks from China, coffee from Yemen, textiles from Anatolia. The Levantine coast, stretching from Syria to Palestine, buzzed with ships, merchants, dock workers, and stories from every corner of the known world. The empire also built sophisticated arsenals, the most famous being the Tersani Amir in Istanbul, a massive imperial shipyard along the Golden Horn. Here, thousands of workers built galleys, frigates, and later steamships. Every rope was measured, every nail counted, every sail inspected. The Ottoman navy even reached into the Indian Ocean, challenging Portuguese expansion along the African and Indian coasts. Admirals like Piri Reis, who created detailed maps of the world, sailed as far as Hormuz, Goa, and East Africa. Piri Reis was not just a sailor, he was a cartographer. And his maps, especially his world map from 1513, show parts of South America, Africa, and even Antarctica with astonishing accuracy. He combined Islamic geography with Portuguese, Greek, and Roman sources, and built a worldview where Istanbul was not just the center of the empire, but the center of the world. But power at sea, like power on land, must be maintained. And over time, the Ottoman navy began to weaken. By the late 16th and 17th centuries, the rise of Western naval powers, especially Spain, England, and Portugal, challenged Ottoman control. In 1571, at the Battle of Lepanto, a Christian alliance under Don John of Austria dealt a serious blow to the Ottoman fleet. Though the Ottomans rebuilt quickly, the symbolic loss shook their aura of invincibility. As the empire focused more on internal reforms and land conflicts, the navy was neglected. Technology lagged. Corruption spread in naval ranks. Foreign advisors were brought in, but not always trusted. By the 18th century, the Ottoman navy was no longer feared. It was tolerated. Still, the empire never abandoned the sea. In the 19th century, sultans like Mahmud II and Abdulaziz invested in modern steamships, naval academies, and European-style training, but it was always catch-up, not leadership. And in World War I, the Ottoman navy was outmatched once again. Its ships outdated, its resources stretched, yet its spirit remains. Today, if you stand along the Golden Horn, you can still see remnants of the Tersain. You can still feel the breeze that once carried Barbarossa's sails. You can visit the tombs of naval legends. You can find Piri Reis's maps in glass cases, the ink still whispering secrets of coasts long claimed and long lost. The Ottoman navy was more than ships. It was a vision of an empire that saw itself not as an island, but as a bridge, not as a wall, but as a wave. It carried pilgrims, protected merchants, housed warriors, and offered ports of safety. Tonight, let your thoughts drift like a lantern, set afloat at sea, gently rocking, gently glowing, surrounded by stars reflected on water. The empire sleeps now, but once it sailed with purpose and with pride. Rest beneath its sail. Now close your eyes and imagine a quiet room, lit by oil lamps lined with scrolls, instruments, and charts of stars. Tonight we turn not to sultans or soldiers, but to seekers, men and women who asked questions, studied the body, charted the heavens, and kept knowledge alive in the flickering candlelight of empire. The Ottoman Empire was a place of warriors, of statesmen, of poets and pilgrims. But behind the noise of courts and campaigns there was always another current, the pursuit of knowledge. From the time of Osman, the Ottomans inherited a rich intellectual tradition, one passed down from the Abbasids, the Persians, the Byzantines, and countless scholars from Spain to Samarkand. They understood something vital. An empire cannot survive by strength alone. It must understand the world it moves through. And so the Ottomans built a vast network of madrasas, hospitals, observatories, and libraries, not only in Istanbul, but across cities like Cairo, Damascus, Baghdad, Edirne, and Bursa. Let us begin. With medicine, the Ottomans saw healing as both a science and a service. Hospitals, or darushifas, were places of treatment, learning, and compassion. One of the earliest and most famous was the Sultan Bayezid II complex in Edirne, founded in the late 15th century. It housed patients in open-air courtyards, with flowing water, aromatic herbs, and soothing music, not just for beauty, but for healing. Doctors there practiced humoral theory inherited from Greek, Roman, and Islamic sources, balancing blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, but they also experimented, observed, and kept detailed case records. Treatments included herbal remedies, cupping, aromatherapy, surgical procedures, and in many cases, music therapy, based on the belief that rhythm could realign the soul. Physicians were trained rigorously. They studied works by Avicenna, Galen, Hippocrates, and newer Ottoman scholars. They were licensed, supervised, and held to high ethical standards. Medicine was not a trade, it was a calling, and it wasn't limited to the elite. The poor were treated free of charge in WAC-funded hospitals. Orphanages, pharmacies, and mental health centers were often connected to mosques and madrasas. There was a quiet dignity in how the Ottomans approached illness, not as something shameful, but as something to be understood and eased. Then there was astronomy, the study of stars, time, and divine order. For Muslims, accurate astronomy was more than curiosity. It determined prayer times, Ramadan, direction to Mecca, and the Islamic calendar. So the Ottomans invested deeply in this science. One of the most brilliant astronomers in Ottoman history was Taqi al-Din. In 1577, during the reign of Murad III, he established the Istanbul Observatory, a state-sponsored research center perched above the city's hills. There, Taqi al-Din and his team made precise measurements of planetary movements, created astronomical tables, and designed sophisticated instruments, including quadrants, armillary spheres, and even an early telescope. He also experimented with mechanical clocks, writing a treatise on a device that showed time in hours, minutes, and seconds, long before such designs were common in Europe. Sadly, his observatory was later destroyed. Due to religious and political pressures, a reminder that science has always had to dance carefully with power. But his legacy endured, his writings translated, his models studied by later scholars. In mathematics, Ottoman scholars contributed to geometry, algebra, and accounting, especially in architecture, where Mimar Sinan and his engineers used geometric precision to design domes that felt weightless. In engineering, they built vast aqueducts, fountains, bazaars, and fortresses using precise surveying tools and hydraulics learned from earlier Muslim and Byzantine sources. In cartography, they followed in the footsteps of explorers like Piri Reis, who combined centuries of knowledge into maps that still dazzle historians today. His book of navigation, Kitab-ı-Bahriye, was more than a manual. It was a beautiful collection of art, geography, and experience. But knowledge in the Ottoman Empire was not confined to scholars. It was lived. In marketplaces, astrologers read the stars for curious clients. In coffee houses, debates broke out over poetry, history, and theology. In homes, mothers taught verses of the Quran alongside herbal remedies. In Sufi lodges, wisdom was sung, whispered, and danced. Libraries flourished. The Suleymaniye Library, for example, housed tens of thousands of manuscripts in Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and more, covering everything from medicine to metaphysics. Books were precious, copied by hand, illuminated with gold, stored with care, passed from teacher to student, from father to son, from elder to youth. And what about the ordinary people? They too had access to knowledge. Mosques hosted free classes. Charitable trusts funded schools. Artisans were often literate, versed in trade laws, arithmetic, and basic theology. The empire was full of shared wisdom, a culture where the pen was never far from the sword. But like all stories, this one carries a slow shift. By the 18th and 19th centuries, European science surged ahead. With printing presses, academies, and Enlightenment thinking, the Ottomans tried to catch up, sending students abroad, translating works, and even founding modern schools. But the bureaucracy was slow, the old elite resisted, and reforms were scattered. Still, the tradition of knowledge remained. Even in decline, the empire did not forget the value of thought, and today that legacy survives, in Turkish universities that trace their roots to Ottoman madrasas, in libraries that house manuscripts written by long-gone hands, in gardens where medicinal herbs still grow, in scholars across the Islamic world who still study, cite, and cherish Ottoman texts. Knowledge, like water, moves quietly. It may dry in one place, but it pools again elsewhere. Tonight, as you fall asleep, imagine the sound of a reed pen on parchment, the soft clink of brass instruments in a star watcher's dome, the hushed voice of a healer reading a prescription, the warmth of a teacher repeating a verse under a fig tree. The empire may have vanished, but its knowledge and its search for meaning lives on, and it lives in you too, with every question you ask, with every answer you seek. Sleep now, scholar of dreams. The lamp of memory still burns. Rest softly tonight, and step into a quieter world where power did not shout but whispered, where decisions were made not in courts of law but in private gardens, gilded halls, and letters sealed in silk. Tonight we meet the women of the Ottoman Empire, veiled not in silence but in influence. History often speaks in a man's voice, of sultans, viziers, warriors, and builders. But behind the throne, behind the palace gates, behind the layers of tradition, walked women who shaped the empire in ways the world rarely saw. To understand them, we must begin at the center of power, the harem. In Western imagination, the harem is often misunderstood, seen as a place of leisure, luxury, and locked away beauty. But the harem-i-Humayun, the imperial harem of the Ottoman court, was far more than a private residence. It was a school, a political institution, a dynastic engine, and in many ways the true heart of the palace. Located deep within the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, the harem was home to hundreds of women, mothers, daughters, concubines, servants, tutors, seamstresses, cooks, and companions. At the top stood one of the most powerful figures in Ottoman history, the Valide Sultan, the Queen Mother. Once the mother of the reigning sultan gave birth to a male heir, she rose through the ranks of the harem, and when her son ascended the throne, she became Valide, and with that she gained enormous influence. She advised the sultan, corresponded with foreign rulers, managed vast charitable foundations, oversaw the internal affairs of the harem, and by extension shaped court politics. One of the most legendary was Kösem Sultan, a Greek-born woman who became the wife of Ahmed I, the mother of Murad IV and Ibrahim, and eventually regent for her young grandson. For decades she pulled the strings of empire, negotiating treaties, appointing officials, and even funding naval expeditions. Another was Hürrem Sultan, wife of Suleiman the Magnificent. She rose from the position of concubine to legal wife, a stunning break from tradition. She advised Suleiman directly. She built mosques, hospitals, and schools. She wrote letters to foreign monarchs. She steered succession in favor of her son, Selim. These women were not ornaments. They were strategists. And outside the palace, too, Ottoman women shaped society. While Islamic law gave women rights that were advanced for the time, including property ownership, inheritance, and legal autonomy, Ottoman women used those rights fully. In cities across the empire, from Istanbul to Damascus, Cairo to Sarajevo, women bought and sold land. They managed waqfs, charitable foundations that built fountains, schools, soup kitchens and libraries. One woman might endow a well for travelers, another might fund a mosque in her neighborhood, another might ensure a hospital cared for the poor long after her death. These weren't acts of vanity. They were statements of presence, and in the courts women were not invisible. They brought cases, they filed lawsuits, they defended property rights, custody rights, and even the terms of marriage contracts. In some regions, court records show that up to 1/3 of all plaintiffs were women, a powerful reminder that Ottoman justice wasn't reserved for men. In literature and art, women played key roles too. Poetesses like Fitnat Hanım and Zeynep Hanım wrote verse that was celebrated in elite circles. They spoke of longing, beauty, sorrow, and sometimes sharp satire. In daily life, women were tailors, spice merchants, midwives, musicians, and storytellers. In rural areas, they tended fields, managed homes, and raised generations. In urban centers, they shaped neighborhoods, markets, and spiritual life. And perhaps most importantly, they were the primary educators of children. They passed down language, faith, manners, stories, and songs, shaping the next generation of Ottoman citizens. Yet as centuries passed, women's spaces narrowed. By the 18th and 19th centuries, as the empire strained under internal weakness and external pressure, women's rights and visibility began to recede. Increased conservatism, combined with a desire to project Islamic identity in the face of European domination, led to more restrictions on education and public roles. But women pushed back. In the Tanzimat era, reformers opened new schools for girls. Magazines written by and for women began to circulate. Issues of veiling, literacy, child marriage, and education were debated publicly. By the early 20th century, a new generation of Ottoman women, journalists, doctors, teachers, emerged into public life. Some even joined the fight in World War I, as nurses, organizers, and even fighters. And when the empire finally dissolved, they carried their legacy into the Turkish Republic. Women like Halide Edip Adıvar became national figures, fighting not only for independence, but for the right to speak, vote, and shape the future. But even beyond politics, the story of Ottoman women is a story of quiet power, in the folds of embroidered letters, in the calligraphy of waqf records, in the gardens they designed, in the lullabies they sang, in the architecture they funded, in the books they wrote under pen names. They were never voiceless, just unheard. They were never powerless, just rarely credited, and their touch is still visible. Tonight, let your dreams wander through the silk-lined corridors of the harem. Let your thoughts rest on the whisper of fabric, the echo of footsteps in a tiled courtyard, the hush of secrets passed from mother to daughter. You are walking in a space where history was not declared, but shaped slowly, with patience, with resilience, with love. Sleep now under the shadow of veils that were never barriers, only filters for light. Let your senses guide you tonight, not to battles or courts, but to kitchens and courtyards, markets and gardens. For the soul of an empire is not only in its palaces, but in its meals, its fabrics, its rituals, and in the gentle rhythm of ordinary days. While history books often remember the Ottomans through conquests, laws, and diplomacy, the empire was also deeply lived. In the warmth of a cup of tea, the fold of a headscarf, the spice of a morning stew. And tonight, we walk slowly through that world of Ottoman daily life in all its color, aroma, and grace. Let's begin in the home, the heart of every family. In cities like Istanbul, Bursa, and Aleppo, Ottoman homes were built not for display, but for privacy and comfort. High walls protected the household from outside eyes. Windows faced inward, toward quiet courtyards shaded with fig or lemon trees. A fountain might splash gently at the center, its rhythm marking the passing hours. The homes were often wooden, with upper floors slightly extended over the street, a design known as kumba. Inside, rooms were flexible. No fixed bedrooms or dining halls. Instead, people slept on rolled-up mattresses, ate on low wooden tables, and sat on cushions along the wall. The floors were covered with hand-woven kilims and rugs, each with unique motifs, often made by the women of the house. Daily life began early. Before sunrise, the household stirred. Men went to the mosque for Fajr, the first prayer. Women lit the tandoor, the hearth, to bake bread. Children, barefoot and giggling, fetched water or helped in the garden. Breakfast was simple but nourishing. Fresh flatbread, olives, goat cheese, honey, cucumbers, and tea or boza, a fermented wheat drink. Later in the day, especially in wealthier homes, came lunch, often the main meal. A stew of lamb, eggplant, or chickpeas simmered for hours. Reis pilaf, often flavored with saffron or cinnamon, was served with dried fruits or roasted nuts. Yogurt was present in many forms, plain, salted, or with herbs. Dishes were placed on a sofra, a round tray laid on a low stand. The family sat cross-legged around it, sharing food with the right hand, passing bread, telling stories. In winter, homes were heated by mangals, small charcoal braziers. In summer, families slept under the stars, on rooftops cooled by night breezes. Clothing varied by region, status, and occasion, but throughout the empire it was rich with texture and meaning. Men wore shalvar, loose trousers gathered at sea. The ankle, and in Taris, long robes belted at the waist. Women wore layered garments, inner dresses, embroidered jackets, and finely woven scarves. Fabrics were dyed with natural colors, deep indigo, saffron yellow, rose red. And for the wealthy, silk came from Bursa or Damascus, sometimes embroidered with gold thread. Clothing wasn't just fashion, it reflected identity. Different religious groups had their own distinct styles. So did regions. A head wrap in Erzurum was tied differently than in Skopje. An apron in Bosnia might carry a woven symbol that no one in Syria would recognize. Shoes were often leather slippers, soft, curved, and practical. For outdoor work, wooden clogs protected the feet from mud or cold stone. But no matter the garment, modesty and pride walked side by side. Let's visit a bazaar now, the beating heart of Ottoman cities. The Grand Bazaar in Istanbul, Kapalı Çarşı, was more than a market. It was a world of its own. Vaulted ceilings painted with stars, stalls lined with silk, spices, ceramics, and jewels, the smell of sandalwood, coffee, and tanned leather in the air. Shoppers bartered softly with raised eyebrows and knowing smiles. Children darted between stalls. Storytellers gathered in corners. Money changers counted coins beneath hanging lamps. Every neighborhood had its own small market, where butchers, weavers, cobblers, and bakers worked side by side. Bakers rose before dawn to heat stone ovens. Barbers sang while trimming beards, in wooden chairs. And the coffee house, perhaps the most Ottoman of spaces, was where men gathered after work to talk, debate, play backgammon, or simply sit in silence, sipping thick, dark coffee served in tiny cups. Women often had separate spaces, courtyards, baths, or charity kitchens, where they met, shared advice, and prepared for celebrations. And oh, the celebrations! Weddings were full of singing, henna, and dance. Eids brought sweets, new clothes, and visits to elders, who, circumcision feasts called Sonnet Dunu, paraded young boys in capes and crowns through the streets. Life was full of ritual, but also flexibility. An Ottoman might pause midday for a prayer, then laugh loudly over a story with a friend. Moments later, spirituality and joy danced together in the streets, and wherever there was space, there were gardens. Even the poorest homes tried to grow mint, basil, or figs in small pots. Public fountains offered water to passers-by. Birdhouses were built into the eaves of mosques, a sign that compassion extended to all living things. And, through all of this, charity. It was woven into daily life. The wealthy built waqfs, endowments that paid for public baths, schools, orphanages, and hospitals. A woman might pay to build a bridge. A baker might give a portion of bread to the poor every evening. A merchant might leave instructions to forgive debts after his death, because life was not about taking. It was about continuity, passing blessings forward. So the world stayed in balance, and though the empire fell, this culture, this daily grace, lives on. In Turkish tea, always offered with a smile. In Syrian sweets wrapped in gold paper. In Balkan embroidery stitched into wedding dresses. In the rhythm of calls to prayer echoing across cities, the empire is gone. But its spirit lingers in kitchens, closets, and courtyards across the world. Tonight, fall asleep in that world, wrapped in cotton sheets, your fingers stained with spices, your ears still humming with the quiet music of evening lamps and distant voices. You are safe here. Not in a palace, but in a home. Not in conquest, but in comfort. Sleep now, child of many cities. The soul of the empire lives on in your dreams. Breathe deeply now. One last time. The story has unfolded across centuries, from a horseback dream in the Anatolian wilds to the marble domes of Istanbul, from swords raised to pens dipped in gold. Tonight we close the pages, not in grief, but in gratitude. The Ottoman Empire began not as a plan, but as a ripple, a small frontier principality, barely noticed by its neighbors, led by a man named Osman, whose name would one day echo across continents. It rose not all at once, but steadily, like the slow swelling of a tide. It expanded under Orhan, transformed under Murad, and thundered forward under Mehmed the Conqueror. It stretched from the deserts of Arabia to the rivers of Hungary, from the shores of North Africa to the mountains of Kurdistan, and for 6 centuries it stood. But empires do not live forever, not even those held together by faith, fire, and law. By the dawn of the 20th century, the world had changed. Machines had replaced horses, colonies had replaced kingdoms, and ideas, new, dangerous, thrilling, began to sweep across the globe. Nationalism, liberalism, modernism, the Ottoman Empire, once the center of the world, became its edge. It tried to adapt, with reforms, constitutions, railways, schools. It fought wars and lost land. It faced rebellion and lost hearts. But it endured until it couldn't. World War I dealt the final blow. The empire was carved into mandates, its capital occupied, its rulers disgraced. In 1922, the Sultanate was abolished. In 1924, so was the Caliphate. And with that, the last great Islamic empire, the last classical empire of the early modern world, was no more. But endings are never truly ends, for even after the empire fell, its echo remained. You hear it in the adhan rising from an Istanbul mosque. You taste it in baklava shared at a Bosnian wedding. You see it in the arches of Cairo, the tiled fountains of Damascus, the bridges of Mostar, the bazaars of Skopje, the calligraphy of old Qurans. In Sarajevo, the Ottoman Empire left behind no grand closing ceremony, no final speech, just millions of people living in the wake of something vast. They carried Ottoman surnames, Ottoman lullabies, Ottoman habits. They spoke in Ottoman phrases, dressed in Ottoman layers, cooked in Ottoman pots, and dreamt under Ottoman stars. Some remembered it with longing, a time of order, beauty, and shared faith. Others remembered it with resistance, a weight they struggled to throw off. But one thing was clear: it had shaped them. And perhaps it shapes us still. Because to remember the Ottoman Empire is to remember the complexity of civilization itself. It reminds us that an empire is more than its rulers. It is also its weavers, bakers, midwives, poets, students, soldiers, scholars, and strangers. It is not just history. It is humanity stretched across time. And you, dear listener, have walked alongside them now. You've heard the footsteps in Topkapi Palace, felt the breeze across the Bosphorus, tasted the cardamom in your morning cup, heard the clash of cannons and the hush of prayer. You've met conquerors and cartographers, mothers and mystics, and now the journey ends, as gently as it began. Tonight, sleep with the comfort of knowing you've traveled across 600 years, through 35 chapters, across dozens of lands, into the hearts of people, whose names may be forgotten, but whose stories breathe still. Close your eyes. The empire sleeps, its cities wrapped in silence, its domes watching the stars, but its spirit, its echo, lives on, in the quiet, in the memory, and in you. Good night, and thank you for remembering.